night, when the sky is filled with brightly shining stars. Just outside what appears to be a castle, we see massive destruction like there was just a battle there. Suddenly, a hand emerges from the rubble, and the man underneath pulls himself out. A voice talks about how a star that doesn't shine in the highest peaks of the night sky and is stuck under the ditches where nobody looks is still a star if it wishes to shine, and still embraces light in its heart. Clearly, they're referring to the man who just rose out of the dirt. The man uses his sword to get back to his feet and gasps for air in the cold night. The scene shifts, and we see the man standing in front of a building, staring longingly at the sword placed on a wall. His bright blue eyes gaze at the blade as it sparkles like magic, and he talks to himself about how cool the piece is no matter how many times he looks at it. He's interrupted when a voice calls out to him. With an annoyed look on his face, he turns to the person who brought him out of his daydream. The lady, whose name is Zemina, claims that she knew she would find him there, staring at the sword like usual. We finally learn that the man's name is Vlad, and as Zemina wears a condescending look on her face, she reminds him that he's been lost in thought lately. Hearing this, Vlad gets upset and warns her not to get on his nerves, pointing out that she's currently interrupting one of the few breaks he has. However, Zemina doesn't seem to care if he gets mad, and just informs him that his behavior is the reason people have started spreading rumors about him. Vlad is shocked to hear that people are talking about him, so he asks her to explain what she means. The girl gets nervous when she realizes that she just accidentally let such sensitive information slip out in her outburst. So, rather than answering him, she just looks away from him and changes the topic. Zemina suddenly asks Vlad if he still hears voices in his head whenever he picks up a stick. Vlad doesn't reply and just stares into space instead, so she concludes that he still hears voices, and curiously wonders what kind of sins he committed in his last life. It appears that for some reason, Vlad was struck by lightning on a clear day, and on top of that, it was black lightning. As rare as such an occurrence is, Zemina advises Vlad to stay cooped up in the shop for a while, claiming that the new bishop is said to be very sensitive about omens and similar stuff. She reveals that he used to work as a heresy inquisitor, and as such, he has a keen eye for supernatural stuff. This puts Vlad in danger, because if the bishop finds him suspicious, he would immediately be sent to the stakes to be burnt. Hearing what she has to say, Vlad is even more downcast because he knows that his life is in danger. He feels bad that she would tell him something like that. But Zemina explains that she only did so because she's worried about him. She reminds him that many people saw him get struck by lightning, and reveals that since then, they've all been talking about him behind his back. She then advises him one more time to stop showing himself to the public by moping at the sword all the time, because the church could take him away at any time. However, Vlad ignores her counsel and insists that he won't get dragged away like a criminal just because he stares at a sword. He says this while looking at the sword in question, and Zemina finally gets fed up, calling him dense and suggesting that he just buy the sword since he likes it so much. As you'd expect, the sword is expensive and way out of Vlad's budget. But when he explains this to her, she claims that it couldn't be that pricey. She believes it's just the work of a back alley blacksmith, and even offers to buy it for him, thinking that she could easily afford it. After a brief pause, Vlad reveals that the sword costs 5 gold, and judging by Zemina's reaction, she finds the price ridiculously high. She doesn't think a stupid piece of metal should cost that much, and starts to think of all the other things she could get with 5 gold. Vlad smugly helps her finish the thought, pointing out that she wouldn't have to work for a whole year if she had that kind of money to spare. Just then, a voice cuts in and grabs their attention. It's an angry old man, who heard Zemina call the pricey sword a stupid metal chunk. The man insults them, and tells them to get out of the place. Judging by his outfit, he's a blacksmith, and he didn't take her comment lightly. The angry man tells them that the sword isn't for back alley kids like them, and sends them away. However, Zemina isn't one to back down from confrontation. She asks the man who would buy the sword if they don't, pointing out that it's being sold in the slums, so only someone living in the slums would end up purchasing it. After making her point, she taunts the old man further by asking if he's out of his mind. Rather than being mad about the question, the man is more offended that she called him old. He gets even more furious at her, claiming that she has no manners. The fearless redhead just makes things worse by suggesting that he only makes swords for knights because he's old and would probably soon kick the bucket. At this point, there's a giant vein bulging out of the man's head as he sees red. He snaps at her, claiming that she's correct before calling her a dumb kid and advising her to go back to her shop and do the dishes. Zemina finally gets a taste of her own medicine, feeling offended that he called her a kid. She retorts that she's a grown lady, and as tensions start to rise, Vlad takes her away from the argument before things get out of hand. He pulls her out of there, telling her not to get worked up. But Zemina is fuming because she doesn't think she said anything wrong. As the two walk away from the old man, he continues to throw insults at them, calling Zemina rotten and full of venom. He thinks back to when she was younger and blames himself for giving her too much food when they had nothing to eat. The old man notices the footprints Vlad left behind and surmises that he was standing there for a long time. He thinks about how Vlad should focus more on making ends meet, rather than daydreaming. The blacksmith takes down the sword and decides that he's going to finally let it go and sell it to someone who can make use of it, because he knows that slum kids never grow up to make it out into the world. The blacksmith holds the precious sword, which happens to be his last work, and thinks about how it's just like Vlad, because they both shine even in a place like the slums. Zooming out, we get to see the center of the northern economy. It's a place called Soara, and it's regarded as the lighthouse of the northern region, thanks to the power of the Bayezid family. However, even this place of brilliance harbors dark shadows found in the slums, where all foul things are thrown. Inside a tavern, we see men drinking wine and chatting with women. The fun is interrupted when a shirtless man pulls a lady by her hair, insulting her for trying to scam him. The woman denies trying to scam him, so he reveals that she tried to sell him fake medicine. He claims that he knows it's fake because he's worked as a mercenary for 20 years. Just then, Vlad arrives at the scene after hearing the noise. The mercenary identifies him as the candle maker and tells him to go get his madam. Vlad blankly tells him that if he wants to see her, he would need to pay gold coins rather than silver. Hearing this, the man is enraged that they would demand gold when their business isn't even run properly. He tells Vlad to bring his mom if the madam isn't available, and accuses him of scamming him with the candle that measures the time, claiming that it burnt down too quickly. Vlad hits back, suggesting that the man should have paid for a longer session if he wanted to have fun, and advises him to climb into his wife's bed instead. The man gets angrier, so the boy decides that he can prove the candles weren't a scam. He even tells the mercenary that he can do whatever he wants with the woman if it turns out that they cheated him. The man is reluctant to accept the terms, claiming he can't trust scammers, but Vlad insists and promises to beat the crap out of him if the candles work fine. His blue eyes begin to glow ominously, and the mercenary gets frightened. He then lights the candle and stands there, waiting to see if it goes out before 5 minutes. Sure enough, the candle goes out at the 5-minute mark, and before the merc can know what's happening, the boy hits him straight in the face with his wooden staff. As the man falls back, Vlad exclaims that the candles are fine after all, and proceeds to kick him in the back and push him into another room. He locks the door behind him and tells the man that he's dead. The terrified mercenary holds his bloody nose and begs Vlad to wait, but the blue-eyed fellow just proceeds to beat the living daylight out of him. He continuously strikes him with the staff for trying to scam the shop, and especially for talking about his mom without respect. The young man beats him so hard that the noises can be heard outside the building. The next morning, at breakfast, Vlad tells a man named George that someone messed with their candles. When the madam hears this, she's outraged and wonders who would dare do such a thing. She then assigns Vlad to find the culprit, but he doesn't know how to. Confused, he asks her how he can do it, and the madam, named Marcella, merrily reveals that she has already found him. It turns out she was the one who messed with the candles, so she could scam the drunkards and make more money. I have to say, for a woman of the night working in the slums, this woman is a real gem of a beauty. Hearing her confession, Vlad is dumbfounded, thinking about how he beat up the fat mercenary for nothing. As he walks down the stairs, he shrugs off the guilt, believing that he had to do it since he's just an employee. This is when he's approached by a group of men, and the ringleader of the lot commends him for what he did the last night. The guy wraps his arm around Vlad's neck and pulls him closer so he can ask him for some money. He heard that Vlad got some tips from selling candles last night, and claims that they needed some money because they're all broke. Vlad snaps at the guy named Burley, and his eyes start to glow once again. Burley teases him, telling him not to get scary, and explains that he's not just asking for money. He's just here to make a fair trade. Hearing this, Vlad is perplexed, so Burley reveals that he has something to give him in exchange for some money. Suddenly, he pulls out a little boy by the hair and claims that the kid is a stupid and unskilled pickpocket. Vlad recognizes the kid, and Burley offers to give him back in exchange for 40 silver. Vlad immediately asks about the kid's fingers and ankles, so Burley assures him that he didn't cut them off but only taught the thief a lesson. Eventually, our hero gives Burley and his goons the silver, and then states that they should just kill the pickpockets next time rather than come to him. The kid is terrified to hear this, but Burley claims that him and his gang aren't murderers. As they leave, Vlad reminds Burley that he's scamming his family and coworkers, but the guy is just excited that he managed to exploit someone using the vagrant kid. After they leave, our hero scolds the boy named Ned. The kid apologizes, claiming that he tried to play it safe, but Vlad just tells him to leave after confirming that he didn't break any bones. Ned thanks him before leaving, and afterward, our hero thinks about how his dream of acquiring 5 gold has just been postponed once again. Later, Vlad visits a man named Harbin, who works for Captain Hoover, more infamously known as the Whale Hunter. He tells the man about Ned and how he didn't lose any fingers. That seems to surprise Harbin, as he recalls the time when he lost his fingers and got his ankles cut for stealing. Young Vlad and Zemina watched him bleed, and he ended up becoming a public lesson for everyone else. He then reveals that he heard that the candles were messed with, and Vlad is surprised how he already knows about that incident. Harbin explains that the rumors have been making the rounds that Marcella is cheating the customers, but he doesn't think she's that kind of a person. Vlad claims that he also thinks the same, but reveals that George already seems to know about it. Harbin suggests that even if they were messing with the candles, they would have a very good reason to do so. Perplexed, Vlad asks what reason they could have, and the fingerless man explains that they most likely need money urgently. On that note, he warns Vlad and tells him to be careful, because there's only one reason an organization would need to rake in money quickly. And he claims that it must be because they're planning a war against another organization. George, the whore's knight. Black Bear, the swine butcherer. Dice, the gambler. Captain Hoover, the whale hunter. And One-Armed Jack, the money bug. These are the 5 bosses who dominate the slums of Sowara. All the darkness of life now slowly approaches Vlad through the shadows. Vlad is in grave danger, and this becomes very evident when Moneybug and his gang come to his shop, looking for his boss. Vlad just stares at him in bewilderment. He can't believe that Moneybug himself would come to the shop. He fixes his gaze on One-Armed Jack, and wonders if the preparation for war have started already. He's drawn out of these thoughts by one of Moneybug's subordinates yelling at him. The ponytailed guy with a scar on his face calls Vlad a brat for not responding to Moneybug and asks him where his boss is. Immediately, a frown appears on our hero's face, and he tells them that he doesn't know where the boss is because he's just a candle seller. Mr. Ponytail seems to have a very short temper because he insults Vlad again and smashes the table while threatening him. The force from his punch sends the candles flying, but even at that, Vlad remains unfazed. He just stares the guy down, showing that he isn't afraid. The workers, on the other hand, are terrified, especially the ladies watching the entire altercation. They all watch with their jaws on the floor, waiting to see what happens next. Suddenly, Vlad gets on one knee and begins picking up all the expensive candles that fell to the floor and got broken. He even tries to get the Ponytail more riled up by suggesting that he's closed for the day. Hearing this, Ponytail is visibly irritated and frustrated that the young man keeps ignoring him. While picking up the broken candles, he suddenly tells the guy to get his feet away. He finally pushes the guy to his limit, so he tries to kick him while he's on one knee, but our hero just uses his trusty wooden staff to strike his leg in midair. Ponytail loses his footing, and with bold determination, Vlad lands another powerful strike on his face. It sends him falling to the floor, and everyone watches as gobsmacked upon seeing it. Moneybug, on the other hand, appears to be amused. With his glowing blue eyes, Vlad glares at his defeated opponent and holds the staff against his face, representing the back alley's unchangeable rule, which is that the winner stands up high, while the loser lies down below. Seeing this, Moneybug's men are outraged that he would do that to their colleague in front of them. They're about to charge him when Moneybug tells them to stop. The boss waves his hook in front of his men, and they're confused as to why he isn't letting them fight. The towering man explains that he actually likes Vlad, and he even proceeds to applaud the candle seller. Even though he has only one hand, he is so impressed that he can't help but clap for Vlad. He implores him to be more understanding of the noise, and the candle seller just replies saying that he doesn't discriminate against the disabled. This dude has no chills. Rather than getting offended, Moneybug finds the comment hilarious and immediately bursts into laughter. He tells Vlad that he would like to have a private chat with him later. The red-eyed boss touches the young boy's face with his hook and asks to be reminded who he took away before, but Vlad just retorts that the person must have died early since he can't remember. Their little exchange is interrupted when one of Moneybug's men calls out to him. Both of them turn around and are surprised to see George and his men standing before them. George teases Moneybug, claiming he would have served him grilled meat if he knew he was coming. But the mountain of a man just dismisses the gesture, reminding George that they're not that close. Regardless, George regards him as his guest and suggests that they go upstairs. Jack claims that he would prefer good liquor over meat, so he asks for some to drink. The knight's green eyes glow scarily as he assures Moneybug that Marcella doesn't disappoint when it comes to hospitality. The intruder's red eyes glow with the same murderous vibe as he suggests that they have a taste of the liquor if that is the case. One of Moneybug's men helps Ponytail back up, and the boss and his men make their way upstairs. After the tension is toned down, Vlad heaves a sigh of relief, thinking about how he almost died a few moments ago. Later, he finishes gathering all the broken candles and wonders how many the Ponytail asshole broke. He's drawn out of his thoughts when Moneybug calls out to him, referring to him as a shining star. Looks like the boss and his men are heading out after their discussion with George and Marcella. The man admits that Marcella and George had only good things to say about Vlad, and while claiming that he has also seen his potential, he asks him to come for him whenever he grows tired of smelling burnt candles. He assures that he would appreciate someone like Vlad working for him, but the loyal candle seller replies that he doesn't mind staying at his current job, especially since they pay him, feed him, and put a roof over his head. Hearing this, Moneybug just laughs in response, pointing out that he can do the same and more. But seeing that Vlad wants to stay there, he tosses him a gold coin as compensation for the broken candles. Our hero is undoubtedly taken aback upon seeing it, and responds that it's too much. The man with the hook still insists, and offers him a lot more of those gold coins if he decides to work for him. After the mouth-watering offer, the man reminds the young man about his title, the money bug, and thanks George for the delicious meal before leaving with his men. Our boy notices that the intruder looked extremely cheerful, and wonders if the meeting went well with the rest. That's when Zemina calls out to him from upstairs, and informs him that George wants to see him. Later, we see Vlad, George, and Marcella in the same room. Vlad stares at something speechless, and as we see that it's a precious knife, George reveals that he was planning to give it to him later. However, since the circumstances call for him to pass it over earlier, he's decided to give it to him now. He tells Vlad to keep the dagger with him at all times, and as the blue-eyed boy receives it, he can tell from the mood in the room that George's and Moneybug's conversation was most likely a total disaster. He looks all over the room and sees all the men brooding with low spirits. Even Marcella is in a foul mood, so he knows that some trouble is brewing. This is when George also tells Vlad that he should stop selling candles. Confused, the boy asks what else he should do if he can't sell candles. Sensing his anxiety, George reveals that they got a tip about one-armed Jack bringing in people from the outside into the slums. He believes that the men are mercenaries who used to be knights, and Vlad chimes in to remark that the men are just like George. With a worried look on his face, George confirms it, implying that he is afraid. The thing is, one-armed Jack already led an overwhelming number of dangerous men. But even then, the former knight George was too much of an obstacle to overcome, since he was like a wolf inside a flock of scared sheep. However, since Jack has brought in mercenaries and swordsmen who are individually as skilled as a knight, the balance keeping everything together before has now been destroyed. George admits that they're already at a disadvantage, and explains to Vlad why they need him on their side. Vlad, however, is surprised that they regard him so highly. George informs him that he will be given his first mission soon, and the information takes him so off guard that he's visibly dumbfounded. Overwhelmed by the situation, Vlad thinks about Harbin, a disabled man without fingers, who also lost his ability to walk. But against all odds, he used his clever mind to teach himself language and mathematics. Those were the skills that opened doors for him and allowed him to rise through the ranks and now work under Captain Hoover. Vlad uses Harbin as his role model. He realizes that he can learn through effort and that the knowledge will take him to higher places. While the young man is practicing with his wooden staff, he starts to hear a voice again. The voice suggests that he narrow the angle of his elbow as he swings down, and Vlad gets pissed off that the voice is back. I guess you're now wondering how he started hearing a voice in his head whenever he's training. Well, it all started 1 month ago, after he was struck by the jet black lightning. Ever since then, the voice, which he considers as demonic whispers, starts echoing in his head whenever he holds a sword or something similar. Frustrated, he tries to block out the voice, claiming that he would first need to buy some holy water before even thinking about getting that sword from the blacksmith. He struggles to ignore it, and decides that he won't reply to it at all. And so, he holds his staff again, and tries his best to focus his mind and strength to strike down. But just when he's about to do it, the voice interrupts his thoughts yet again, telling him to narrow the angle of his elbow. He accidentally listens to the voice, and is surprised to see that the result of the strike is significantly better. In fact, he realizes that the strike followed the path of a sword, a road that can turn him into a master if he walks down on it. He feels as if he's holding a real sword, and finally starts to wonder what the hell has made its way into his mind. Is the voice in his head just a recollection of memories or a past life? The scene shifts to somewhere in the cold snowy mountains, and we see a man cleaning the blood off his sword. He talks about how one can't fool experience, and admits that he can now feel how cold the winter air is in his bones. Judging by his outfit, the man is a knight. He hears noises coming from the bushes and surmises that someone is hiding in there. He smirks as he suggests that the person hiding is either stupid, or being stupid on purpose for trying to fool him. The white-haired knight walks towards the source of the noise, and asks whoever is hiding to come out. There's a brief pause, and after a while, a voice replies to him, asking if he's Sir Stanga. The scar-faced knight sees the person, and immediately identifies him as the one they call Vlad, after seeing his unique blue eyes and blonde hair. Sir Stanga reveals that he's heard about the guy from the slums, especially because people have been talking about him a lot. He comments on his blue eyes and blonde hair, claiming that those who didn't know any better would think he's a noble. Vlad doesn't say anything about that, but just goes straight to the point of his visit. He gives Sir Stanga a sealed letter from his boss, George. The knight opens the letter, and upon reading it, a small smile of amusement appears on his face. Sir Stanga reads that the opposing organization has a mercenary who used to be a knight, and finally understands why George needs his help. Seeing that the knight is on board, Vlad informs him that he will be his guide back to George, and suggests that they should arrive at their destination in 2 nights. Vlad turns around, expecting Sir Stanga to follow him, but the knight just teases him, claiming it wouldn't be a good idea to follow the lead of someone as stupid as him. Hearing this, Vlad explains that he's capable of at least guiding him back to meet George. However, Sir Stanga doesn't think so. He tells the young man that there's no way he can be smart when he's doing something so stupid. Vlad starts to get offended, but the knight just glares back at him with his purple eyes. At this point, our hero doesn't know what to say to change his mind, but Sir Stanga finally agrees to follow him. However, he swears to kill him if he forgets any routes on the way back. Vlad glares at the knight as well, but just tells him to try and keep up, explaining that he wouldn't want to screw up his first mission because of him. The blonde-haired guide turns away for the second time and begins walking, leaving the knight baffled that he didn't even seem intimidated by him, even when he intentionally made himself look threatening. In fact, Vlad blatantly ignores his threats, and it amuses Sir Stanga a bit because he concludes that it's his boldness that makes George like him so much. The knight hasn't spent a lot of time with our hero, but he can already tell that he's a child worthy of being nurtured. Later that night, the duo stops at a small cave to rest for the night. They start a fire and just sit there in awkward silence. After a while, Stanga notices that Vlad keeps looking at him from time to time, so he gets uncomfortable and confronts him about it. He asks the young man why he keeps looking at him like it's his first time seeing a retired knight. The kid sheepishly admits that it is in fact his first time seeing one up close. Sir Stanga asks Vlad if he's a country bumpkin, but in response, he asks the retired knight where he's from. Stanga tells him he's from a place called Dikia, and Vlad exclaims, commenting on how that place is so country. The knight finds it a bit offensive and quickly changes the topic, reiterating his earlier threat to kill him if they get lost along the way. With a very mean look on his face, he warns Vlad not to lose his way, and promises to slice him in half if he does. However, just like before, our boy isn't even slightly frightened. He just tells the knight not to say such scary things either way. While unwrapping some beef jerky he brought with him, Vlad reveals that he once heard that all jokes made by knights are threats. Sir Stanga doesn't even reply to him, because he's more interested in the meat. He admits that it looks very fresh, and asks the young man if his share is in there somewhere. Our hero responds that George didn't give him much, and asks him if he doesn't have anything to eat. Stanga replies that he does, revealing the small few pieces of meat he has as he looks at them in dissatisfaction. Vlad then puts his meat on sticks and begins to roast them with the fire. The smell is so good that Sir Stanga's mouth starts to water just thinking about it. In his desperation, he offers to answer any question Vlad asks him in exchange for a piece of jerky. He then tells our hero that it's a rare opportunity and urges him to grab it. With a mouthful of meat, Vlad looks at him curiously, contemplating whether or not to take the deal. Eventually, he breaks the silence and blankly asks Sir Stanga how many pieces of jerky he wants, explaining that he should just ask if he wants some. Stanga gets offended again, so he explains that his pride won't allow him to do so. He reveals that knights only get something when they give something in exchange, before folding his arms and closing his eyes, implying that he isn't ready to compromise. Seeing this, our boy reminds him that he's a retired knight. However, Stanga reveals that he's gone by that belief all his days, and isn't ready to change that now. In the end, Vlad decides to ask him his name, and he responds. The kid then asks him his age, and the knight reveals that he's 42 years old. Stanga suddenly realizes that Vlad hasn't given him any meat in return for the answers, so he calls him a brat. Our hero just ignores him once again, and proceeds to ask the next question. He asks the retired knight if he knows how to use aura. Upon hearing this, Stanga smiles and admits that Vlad only looks innocent on the outside because of how much he knows. Stanga then tells him that not all knights are able to wield aura, and explains that using aura is a different thing entirely from just possessing it. Our hero senses that Stanga is trying to dodge the question, so he blankly asks him again whether he can use aura or not. The knight smiles and then hesitates, causing Vlad to become so anxious that he even offers to give him all the beef jerky in exchange for his answer. After wasting a little time, Stanga reminds Vlad that a knight should only take something when he's given something in return. As such, he decided to show him something special. He pulls out his sword and grips it tightly in front of his body. He then closes his left eye, which has a scar on it, and our boy asks him why he's closing it. Stanga responds, telling him that it's because he needs to bring forth his world from deep within his soul. With the eye still closed and beginning to glow with a magical blue color, the knight tells our hero to watch him carefully. Just then, the sword begins to glow as well, and Stanga tells him that this is the essence of knights. The bright blue light starts beaming even more, and the aura shines so much that Vlad is forced to cover his face. Later that night, the both of them make their way to a city. The retired knight complains about feeling gross, but Vlad tells him that it's better if they look dirty and inconspicuous than look like knights and draw attention. However, it turns out Stanga isn't even talking about his appearance. He laments that he's actually talking about his mood, and explains that he has a lot of pride as a knight and doesn't like the idea of them passing through a hole. He asks Vlad why they have to go through there, so the guide explains that he was instructed to escort him back in secret. If they go through the main gate, their arrival won't be much of a secret. But even after Vlad explains this to Stanga, he still grumbles like a 5-year-old. The young man encourages him to keep moving and promises to prepare a bath for him when they arrive at their destination. While walking through the secret passage, Stanga points out how quiet it is and admits that it bothers him. Vlad replies, telling him that the place is dead silent because it's that time of the night. Just then, the two stumble upon something that shocks them. Before them are several dead men. Stanga asks if the place always has things like this, and of course, our boy responds that it doesn't. Looking at the corpses, Vlad figures that the men probably fought each other. He suddenly suggests that they split up and promises to tell Stanga where the secret back door is, which is used strictly by the members of his organization. Hearing this, the knight looks concerned about him and asks the kid where he will be going. Vlad then reveals that he would be passing through the main gate, claiming that it would be wiser to split up the attention. As Vlad starts walking away, he tells Stanga that they will meet up later. After some time has passed, our hero arrives at the shop and is shocked to see the place has been turned upside down. And then, he sees a wounded George with bandages all over his body, and Marcella is standing by his side and tending to him. When the horse knight sees Vlad, he commends him for making it back safely. Unfortunately, he also reveals that Moneybug attacked them first. He had already anticipated that, because he knows that those who hold money are usually on another level of strength. A worried Vlad looks at George, asking him if he's okay. George admits that it's been a while since he went toe-to-toe with someone on the same level as a knight, and because of that, he ended up getting injured quite heavily. However, the former knight is less concerned about himself, and more interested in whether he was able to bring Stanga with him. Vlad reveals that he found him, but that they had to split up because the main gate was being watched. He then adds that he told Stanga where the back door was, and speculates that he should have arrived by now. George is pleased with the news, because he plans to attack Moneybug the next day, and hopes to end things for good. He also asks Vlad how Stanga looks, hoping that he's currently in fine shape. Our boy confirms that the retired knight is okay, and admits that he looks like a good person too. Hearing this, George reveals that Stanga has a hearty side to him, and Vlad adds that he can also be quite nimble. The boss asks our hero if Stanga looks like he lost weight, claiming that one needs to look after himself to live a long life. Vlad then reveals that he knows Stanga can use aura, and because of this, he believes they would be victorious in their battle the following day. Rather than cheering, George is shocked by the fact that Stanga possesses such strength. That's when Vlad hears footsteps and figures that Stanga has arrived. But George calls him before he can leave, asking him if he's sure that Stanga was able to use aura. Suddenly, the former knight grabs his sword and tells the young man to get behind him. In a shocking twist, George reveals that Stanga doesn't know how to use such power, and before Vlad can piece everything together, the so-called knight appears with his sword and coat covered in blood. The apparent imposter tells George that he's come to a very far place, before greeting him in a menacing manner, claiming that it's been a long time since they last saw each other. In a short flashback, we find ourselves back in the snowy mountains. It turns out that while the imposter was cleaning the blood on his sword, he was actually talking to someone he'd just killed. He tells the man that he can't fool his age, and suggests that the winter wind may have gotten into his bones. It was at that moment that he heard the noise coming from the bushes, and went out to find out that it was Vlad. In the present, we see the imposter wearing a sick grin on his face, and telling George that he's changed a lot since the last time they saw each other. George asks him why he came looking for him now of all time, and in response, the imposter tells him that Count Gadar has passed away. Upon hearing this, George seems visibly shaken by the news. The imposter further adds that the news hasn't been publicly announced as a result of some complications, but assures him that soon, everyone will find out. The annoying purple-eyed knight pours himself a drink and starts to mock the deceased Count Gadar. He raises the glass and toasts to the pitiful count, well aware that it would get on George's nerves. Sure enough, George becomes furious, and as he curses at the imposter, he pulls out his sword and charges at him. The other guy is unfazed and just holds the glass cup in the air as a way of taunting him, knowing that it would force him to try and attack him. Just when George is about to land a powerful hit on him, he dodges it so quickly that none of them can believe it. The attacker shatters the glass cup with his sword, and everyone else is bewildered by how fast the imposter moved out of the way. He then toasts to the new count, Sigmund, which multiplies George's anger by several folds. Not only did he mock the former count, but now he hails the new and most likely corrupt one. The already injured boss turns around and swings his sword at the imposter called Godin, but he blocks it with his own blade. As the two clash swords intensely, Godin reveals that Count Sigmund's first order is that the deserter knight named George should be brought back immediately. George declares that Sigmund isn't his lord, and so he refuses to obey him. Godin admits that the count didn't expect him to return without a fight, nor did he hope for his safe return. The two powerful sword swingers go back and forth with their duel, but Godin proves to be a lot more agile. He dodges George's attempt to strike his feet, before evading another powerful swing to his torso. As the fight gets even more intense, Vlad tells Marcella that it isn't safe for her to be there. While the heavyweights go at it, Vlad grabs Marcella and quickly leads her outside, helping her escape before she gets hurt. When they get outside, the men who are downstairs suddenly call out to Vlad, asking what all the noise upstairs is all about. Vlad spots Burly and immediately orders him to get all the men upstairs at that moment. He also tries to explain the situation and inform them that their boss is in the middle of a deadly fight, but before he can complete his sentence, George is sent flying downstairs. Vlad and Marcella can do nothing but watch in horror as he plummets down below. The men downstairs are also too stunned to move, and they all watch George fall from the great height. Meanwhile, just when George is about to hit the floor, Godin bursts through the wall, wondering why George is still making the naivest choices ever. Finally, the boss crashes to the ground with great force, and as he lies there in pain, the men surround him, confused at what the hell is going on. Their murmurs are interrupted when poor George starts to cough. Godin watches from above as the former knight struggles to get back up, and his purple eyes glare at the boss as he waits to see what he will do next. Just then, a dagger is sent flying towards Godin's head, and it's not just any dagger, it's the one George gave to Vlad. Godin manages to block it with his sword just in time, causing it to bounce away and sink into the wooden floor. Vlad's blue eyes match Godin's glare, and after a short staring contest, the knight charges at the injured boss with his sword. As he jumps down to deal the finishing blow, Vlad yells for George to get out of the way before it's too late. The boss hears this just in time, and musters the power to leap out of there before Godin can kill him. He manages to dodge the strike, while the silver-haired knight sinks his sword into the floor. Afterward, George falls to his knees again and grabs his weapon. Godin gets back up and asks him why he didn't just follow the orders he was given in the past. George replies, telling him that he couldn't carry out such terrible orders because he's a human being with a sense of honor. Hearing this, Godin corrects him, reminding him that he's a knight and not just an ordinary human being. This makes George furious again, and he starts growling in rage. His men join him too, and when Godin sees that he's outnumbered, he decides that the night has dragged on for too long. The imposter closes his left eye and says that now he just wants to rest. Vlad sees this move and recognizes it, so he knows that Godin is about to use his aura. He runs as fast as he can, trying to stop him from doing it. But before he can get there, Godin's sword and eyes are already glowing, and the aura is activated. Blue lines start to appear on George and his men, implying that they are the targets of the attack. Unfortunately, they can't do anything to stop it, and the bright, powerful energy that is released blows back our hero and kills all of George's men. By the time the dust settles, Godin is gone, and all of George's men are lying lifeless, covered in blood. Vlad groans as he gets back up, and is horrified to see the result of what just happened. Everyone else is dead, and all we can see is George's face dripping blood to the floor. Our boy is broken when he sees his mentor's demise, and thinks back to when he was younger. He remembers how George was the first to offer him a helping hand, when he was just a boy rolling in the back alley dirt. The knight was the first one to acknowledge Vlad, when no one else saw his potential. And as time went on, he became the strongest person Vlad had ever known. But now, that strongest person had been killed, and as the blue moonlight quietly approaches, we see Godin holding George's head in his hand. The imposter had beheaded the only father figure that our hero had ever known. Vlad stares at George's head, probably hoping that it's all a dream. But the more he looks, the more he realizes that his world has been shattered to pieces by this villain that he brought into his home. Devastated, he grabs George's sword and yells in utter distraught. But just when he's about to strike with the sword, he hears the voice in his head, telling him to stop at once. Regardless, he swings the blade with great force, but Godin easily dodges it. Even if the attack wasn't a threat, the knight is shocked to see that Vlad knew how to swing in the sword path. He's perplexed, because a gutter kid from the slums shouldn't know how to do that. I guess he doesn't know that this gutter kid was struck by jet black lightning. Regardless of his curiosity, Godin is impressed, and he admits it. Unfortunately for him, Vlad doesn't care if he's impressed, he only cares about killing him. The enraged kid charges him for the second time, yelling at him to die. Just then, Godin blasts him with an attack, but Vlad manages to quickly twist his body and deflect it. He finally gets a hit in, and it's so powerful that it sends Godin flying, even making him lose his sword. The imposter gets back to his feet and is stunned by what he just witnessed. He concludes that Vlad must have been born with a gift and believes that it's the reason he was able to instinctively twist his body and deflect the attack. But even though the boy managed to deflect it, it's clear that his body got hurt from twisting and turning so quickly. He falls to the ground and groans in pain, but the voice in his head tells him to take it easy. It urges him to breathe and not to lose his focus. Vlad holds the side of his stomach and continues to groan as he curls up on the floor. Godin watches the kid struggle on the floor and thinks about killing him now. He contemplates snuffing out the light and potential Vlad possesses, but ultimately decides that it would be too much of a waste, even though he knows that the child could return with an even sharper sword. The knight thinks back to when he and George were still friends. George had once told him that he found pleasure in watching over those with great potential, and the memory pops a faint smile on Godden's face. He calls out to Vlad, who's still wincing in pain. He tells him that a knight only takes a fair price, and a perplexed Vlad asks him what he's talking about. Suddenly, Godden tosses back 2 slices of beef jerky that Vlad gave him in the cave. He tells him that his name isn't Stanga, and he's not 42 years old either. He explains that the boy got an unfair price, which is the reason he's tossing back some pieces to even out the exchange. However, he declares that he will still be taking George's head back with him. Vlad stares in horror once again at his master's bloody severed head, and listens as the impostor says that he would be taking it away, because it's a fitting price for him as the victor. He says this with arrogance and pride, staring Vlad down and waiting for his response. The heartbroken kid is filled with rage, and scowls at the impostor before vowing to kill him. Godden just scoffs at the statement, and looks away in disappointment. He tells Vlad that he shouldn't even think about asking for the second price for the beef jerky, especially with the way his life is at the moment. After that, Godden turns and starts walking away, leaving our hero fuming with rage. Vlad stays on his knees and tries to stand up. At this point, he's gnashing his teeth and stuttering as he vows to kill the bastard who beheaded his master. But the impostor just ignores him, and walks out of the shop holding George's head like a trophy. Vlad yells his name, but he's ignored once again as the knight keeps walking away with a straight face. He finally walks through the hole he made in the wall earlier, and our hero warns him of the day he would come back to kill him. The devastated kid repeats his promise loudly, and for the first time since the story started, we see him shedding tears. His bright blue eyes well up and glow as he screams in agony with tears rolling down his face. After Godden's rampage at the shop, Zemina helps an injured Vlad get out of the place. She holds him up as he limps out and groans in pain continuously. Throughout, he keeps his hand placed on the source of the pain, and at some point, it stings him so much that he falls to his knee. Vlad just stays there, sweating and panting, trying his best to overcome the excruciating pain. The scene shifts back to a few moments prior, and we see that he's now back inside the shop. Marcella bluntly tells him to get up as he curls up like an armadillo. She asks him if he wants to die, but he doesn't even respond to her. The kid just stares into space and stays silent, implying that he might not even mind dying at this point. Marcella senses this, and gets so upset that she immediately slaps him hard in the face. She tells him to get his acts together, and then asks him if he knows what the difference is between the guys who live in the center of the city and those who live in the slums. Vlad doesn't know the answer, so he just stares at her like a lost puppy hoping he doesn't get smacked again. Marcella tells him that the difference between them is opportunity. She explains to him that those guys in the city can get back up, even if they fail once, because they can afford to do it. Unfortunately, for the losers in the slums like them, it isn't the case. Marcella tells Vlad to look around the wrecked shop filled with corpses of their own men. She asks him if they look like they can afford to fail as well, pointing out that the destruction is the result of just one failure on their part. She explains that they've been bound to a tragic fate that sentences them to death if they fail even once. Because of this, Marcella tells Vlad that he shouldn't let the chance, that comes once in a lifetime, slip out of his hands. She goes closer to him and holds him up by grabbing his shoulders, making her point very clear to him. And now back to the present, we see that our hero has a new look of determination on his face. Zemina, seeing that he's in pain, asks if he's okay and suggests that she should slow down to make it easier for him. However, Vlad refuses and insists that they have to keep moving. He refuses to allow himself to end things there. He wipes the beads of sweat on his face and prepares to get back to his feet with Zemina's help. Unfortunately, that's about the same time when one of their enemies spots them. He immediately alerts the others, revealing that he's found George's little minion who they've been looking for. All of a sudden, Vlad is filled with adrenaline and begins to run for his life, even though he was limping just a few seconds ago. Zemina runs as well, and the boy pulls her by the hand to ensure that he doesn't leave her behind. He urges her to run as fast as she can, and as the enemies pursue them with their swords, he thinks about how their home has been destroyed. Even if they were just 2 young birds, the time had come for them to soar into the sky on their own, since their nest is no more. They both manage to escape from their pursuers, leaving them confused. The killers with swords turn in circles, trying to figure out which way the kids went, but their efforts are futile. In frustration, one of them curses the kids, calling them little rats, while another suggests that they escaped into another alleyway. In the commotion, the leader of the gang suddenly orders the goons to inspect every corner, promising to reward them handsomely if they find the kids. The gang leader's face is revealed, and we see that it's the ponytail guy who Vlad humiliated back at the shop when Moneybug first arrived. Turns out, his little encounter with our hero cost him a few teeth. And because of that, he desperately wants to have his revenge. He wants Vlad to pay for the shame he made him feel back at the shop. Hearing that they would be rewarded, the men are remotivated to keep searching. They decide to split up, believing that Vlad and Zemina couldn't have gone too far. Unfortunately for them, in their haste, they run past the door where the kids are hiding behind. They don't even notice that it isn't locked. Meanwhile, Vlad and Zemina are hiding quietly behind it. The boy is holding his dagger while Zemina is covering her mouth with her hands, so her muffled cries don't give their position away. Vlad listens closely as the men who run past and continue searching. He reasons that they won't be able to escape with the way things are going, because it's only a matter of time before they get caught. As a result, he tells Zemina to go outside and escape once things get quieter. As you'd expect, she's worried about him and asks him what he would do. Our hero explains that he needs to get out of there somehow and points out that it would be dangerous for them to move together since their pursuers are close by. However, Zemina doesn't think they should split up at all. She refuses the idea and tells Vlad that she wants to stay with him, reminding him of the promise he made to Marcella before they set out. Vlad vowed that he would take Zemina to a safe location before leaving her alone. He just tells her that she should go to the convent before sunrise, and if she's not okay with that, he also suggests that she can go to Harbin. Still, Zemina doesn't want to see things his way, and decides to throw a tantrum like a toddler, lamenting that she doesn't want to be separated. Vlad gets fed up at this point, so he snaps at her for never listening to anyone. He even calls her an idiot to make sure he gets his point across, explaining to her that he's not in a position to protect her at the moment. Speechless at the sudden outburst, the girl starts to cry. Just then, the consequence of their rather loud argument catches up to them. A man suddenly appears, demanding to know who's inside. Zemina panics and immediately grabs a knife lying on the floor to defend herself if things get rough. The man finally reveals himself. He comes out of another room with a lamp, and we see that he's the blacksmith from earlier. He recognizes the kids and asks them what they're doing there. Once again, Zemina starts to get on his nerves, calling him an old man and threatening him with the knife. With a very bored look on his face, the man hits back at her, asking her what the hell is wrong with her, and pointing out that she and Vlad are the ones intruding in his house. As usual, the girl doesn't even listen, and just insists that he doesn't move, threatening to stab him for real. The blacksmith matches her gaze, and notices that she's tearing up and frightened. He can tell that she's scared, so he tries to calm her down, explaining that he understands their situation. He calmly tells her to put the knife down, but she insists that he give her the sword that Vlad is always staring at. The blacksmith is confused hearing this, so Zemina makes it clear that she's dead serious, and for good measure, she also clarifies that it's the one he had hanging outside. She explains that they won't be safe outside the city either, and tells him one last time to give it to her because she isn't joking around with him. Vlad finally intervenes, telling her to put the knife down, but she just throws another tantrum, yelling at the blacksmith to bring out the sword. The blacksmith senses her desperation and thinks about how this is the way things are in the slums. He believes that this is the true character of people who need to take something from others in order to survive. He thinks back to when he was younger and admits to himself that he too was the same, so he's not surprised to see this girl acting in such a way. After a long pause, the blacksmith just tells Zemina that her situation is quite sad, hinting that he won't really help her. This makes her so mad that she charges at him with the knife. The man sees that she's about to stab him and closes his eyes like he's accepted his fate. Vlad also thinks that she's going to stab the man and calls out to her, but to their surprise, she just cuts her hair with the knife instead. The old man's eyes open wide at this scene, and with tears in her eyes, the poor girl offers him her red hair, claiming that she knows it's not enough to pay him, but promises to pay him back later. She begs the man to give Vlad the sword, and her desperation and concern is extremely clear in her eyes. The blacksmith is speechless, but then asks Vlad if he's leaving the slums. The boy confirms it to be the case, and the old man admits to himself that Vlad is going to finally achieve the one thing he could never do. He had dreamt of it all of his life, and he's now going to spread his wings. The blacksmith is touched by the kids, and although reluctant, he agrees to help them at the end. The scene shifts, and we see the old man carrying a wagon of dirt and trash, while Zemina wears a hood to disguise herself as she pushes it from behind. He tells her that it's the only way out of the city, even though she complains about the smell. Suddenly, some goons that the blacksmith recognizes confront them, asking him why he's taking out the trash at such a late hour. He immediately snaps at them, cursing them and reminding them that they were the ones who blocked all the alleyways with their stupid fight. He complains that his smithy is about to burst because he couldn't throw out the garbage earlier. The leader of the goons spots the hooded person behind the wagon, and gets suspicious because he knows the old man works alone. The blacksmith quickly explains that he was tired, so he gave the boy some bread to work for him. Of course, the guy doesn't buy the story and goes to investigate the person. He uses his knife to raise the hood, threatening to cut Zemina if she moves. When he raises it, he sees her short ginger hair, and when she also acts like a poor boy trying to make a living, he lets her off the hook. Before they leave, the old man asks what they're looking for, so they reveal that they're searching for George's blonde-haired kid's body. The blacksmith just scoffs and asks if they can be on their way now, but the guy claims that they have to be certain he's not helping the boy. So, he tells his subordinate to check the wagon and asks the blacksmith to move it aside. At this point, the old man starts to wonder if they shouldn't have come this way, but remembers that there was nowhere else for them to go. The goon inspects the trash and admits that it's quite a lot. Suddenly, as he notices a hint of movement, he tells them not to hate him because it's his job, before proceeding to stab the heaps of dirt with his staff. The old man and Zemina are terrified when they see this, and Vlad, who's hiding under the dirt, is equally afraid. Out of nowhere, he starts mentioning that Harbin has put a boat out on the water, and he believes that he must have done it for a reason. He tells them to keep it in mind, and after stabbing the dirt, he says that he has now paid the debt of 40 silver coins that his young brother, Ned, owed him. The generous guy allows them to pass, and it appears he knew Vlad was in there, but let them leave the city anyway, because the boy had helped out his brother before. And now, Zemina and the blacksmith finally reach the outskirts of the town, where the trash is dumped into a channel that leads outside the walls. As they toss out the trash with Vlad in it, Zemina says her goodbyes, and the old man thinks about the star sword in the boy's hand. It was something he made with his dreams, and also something that was bought with the girl's tears. And now, it lays in the hands of a single boy, destined for a greater world. Outside the town, Vlad comes out of the dirt with the sword and starts to speak to the voice in his head. Holding the weapon, he asks if the voice can hear him, and it answers him with a yes. He then asks the voice who they are, but the voice doesn't seem to know. It's a bit baffling to our hero, because the voice knows so much about swords, but doesn't even know about itself. He decides that it's probably for the best, and offers to help the voice so it can help him as well. He offers to help the voice regain its memories, and asks it to be his sword in the future. At this point, Vlad doesn't even care if the person behind the voice is the devil, because whenever he pictures the insurmountable figure of God and who slaughtered his friends, he's already afraid that he might amount to nothing in this world. Hearing his determination, the voice tells our hero that he's finally going to tell him about his sword. After that, the scene shifts to somewhere in the snowy mountains, and we see a camp set up by soldiers, along with a banner of a noble family. A man seems to be moving chess pieces on a map, most likely strategizing for a battle. While doing so, he suddenly comments that this is too easy. This man happens to be Joseph Bayezid, the second son of the powerful Bayezid family. He looks intensely at the board and chess pieces, and once again says to himself that this is too easy. Finally, he's interrupted when one of his subordinates enters the room. The man greets Joseph, his young master, and informs him that he has just returned. Joseph addresses the man as Jaeger and greets him with excitement. The short-haired man sporting an eye patch stands before his master and notices that something is bothering him. He expresses his concern, and Joseph admits that it's because the battle seems far too easy. Hearing this, Jaeger proceeds to brief his young master on the recent monster subjugation. He explains that it has been going smoothly and reveals that the number of casualties is small. They have only lost a few mercenaries. However, Joseph seems more concerned about the deserters. He fears that everyone would doubt his ability to command if there are deserters in his army. Joseph thinks that his father and the vassals are certainly going to think less of him, and as for his older stepbrother, Rudiger, he's sure that he would grasp at any opportunity to strike. Jaeger just stands there speechless, and Joseph ponders on what to do next. The young master thinks that there will be a lot of destruction if he can't become the next count, and if that happens, he already knows what his brother would do to the rest. He remembers how the Bayezid family has glorified the military for many years, and he knows this because his own father and blood brothers have continuously stepped on each other to gain such a position. The young master is aware that chaos is coming, and admits that he doesn't have enough swordsmen except for Jaeger. Hearing this, Jaeger steps forward, and reveals that he has something else he would like to tell him about. The young master's curiosity is piqued instantly, so he orders Jaeger to reveal whatever it is he wants to say. The loyal swordsman then tells him about a suspicious soldier among them, and Joseph surmises that it could be a spy sent by his brother. Jaeger agrees with the assumption, but claims that it's not the reason this particular soldier is suspicious. In fact, he thinks his master can only understand better if he sees his work for himself. The scene shifts, and we see the corpse of a goblin monster, probably killed by Joseph's soldiers. The young master looks at the creature, and seems rather disgusted by its corpse as he covers his nose. He takes a closer look at the goblins that are dangling from a wooden shed, and guesses that their injuries were probably inflicted by a child who just started wielding a sword. Jaeger takes Joseph to see more corpses, and upon seeing them, the young master is also unsatisfied by the kind of wounds he's seeing. Joseph thinks that all the injuries are poor and claims that they're all the same. And then, he finally sees one that is a bit impressive. The goblin's torso has been sliced clean open, and after a while, he realizes that the wounds were all done by the same person. From the similarity between all of them, Joseph surmises that all the monsters were killed by the same person, so he asks Jaeger just to be sure. The one-eyed soldier confirms the theory and reveals that the corpses he's currently looking at only came here yesterday, and he explains to Joseph that the ones he saw earlier were killed a month ago. The young master is shocked to hear this and almost doesn't believe that someone who made such poor cuts would have perfected his swing in just a single month. Even though he thinks it's impossible, he can't help but ask Jaeger about this person. The scene shifts, and the next thing we see is a group of men slaughtering a horde of goblins in the snowy forest. The goblins surround one of the men, but he holds his own against them by wielding his spiked club and fighting off the ones he can. One of the other men shouts for them to tighten their formation so they can make sure the monsters don't escape. Just then, a man holding a spear appears. He steps on one of the goblin corpses and tells the other men that he can see the end, encouraging them to get the rest of the goblins fast. However, rather than being motivated, the other soldiers are horrified because they suddenly see a giant red-eyed hobgoblin standing behind the man and preparing to kill him. The guy gets confused when he sees the look on their faces and wonders what's going on. Unfortunately, before he can ask or be told what's happening, the giant monster smashes him with its wooden club. The force of the smash is so great that it sends a lot of snow flying in the air. When the snow settles back, the other soldiers see that the goblin has bashed the guy's head into the ground. Even though they are scared out of their minds, they try their best to stay brave and fight the urge to run for their lives. The creature roars at them, but they still don't run away, so it charges at them in rage and begins its onslaught. As it kills them one by one, the men wonder where the crazy monster even came from. When the guys at the back see that the monster has broken through their fifth group, they finally start to retreat. However, their fat old commander orders them to hurry up and go forward to contain the beast. The man reminds them that they won't be paid if they retreat, but the mercenaries reply, telling him that they didn't know they would have to face such a monster. They tell the commander that he should have contacted expensive mercenaries instead, or better still, they ask him to fight the monster himself. Enraged, the commander tries to force them back into the battlefield by threatening them, but before he can pull out his sword, the hobgoblin kills the men he was trying to scare right in front of him. Seeing the monster up close, the commander sits on his horse, knowing that he's probably going to get killed as well. Just then, a man walks out from among the mercenaries and starts walking towards the ferocious beast. The other men look shocked and confused at first, but then identify the brave man as the praying Rimmon. They might know this blonde swordsman as Rimmon, but we know that he's actually our boy Vlad. He bravely tells them that he would take on the monster by himself, and as you'd expect, nobody seems to oppose him. The hobgoblin sees Vlad walking toward it and charges at him right away. Our hero also braces himself for the fight, and as the beast reaches him, he quickly slashes its side with his sword. However, he could immediately tell that the cut was shallow. That oversight gets him distracted for a bit, but the voice in his head tells him to dodge before the goblin can smash him with its club. Regaining his senses, Vlad manages to dodge the series of heavy attacks by the monster. As he skids back to a halt while knocking up the snow, he admits that he failed in his attack earlier. The voice starts reprimanding him for it, calling him stupid for not being able to do it even after he was told what to do. Still, our boy knows better that it's almost impossible to perform a new move after only hearing about it once. Anyway, he gets back to his feet, and as the goblin charges at him again, he explains that he's just taking the long route in the fight. The hobgoblin swings its giant club at him once again, and once again, Vlad manages to dodge it just like before. The monster gets frustrated after missing so many times and attempts to unleash a powerful slam on him to finish things off for good. It smashes the club on the ground, causing a huge snow explosion, but when the snow clears, it realizes that it missed once again. The bamboozled creature just stands there in shock, and in that moment of vulnerability, Vlad takes the opportunity to finally cut the monster properly with his sword. As he stretches his arms, the sword begins to glow, and by the time the monster sees him coming, it's already too late for it to survive. The panel shifts back to Jaeger and Joseph, where Jaeger informs the young master that the person responsible is called the Praying Rimmon. Joseph finds the name intriguing and asks his one-eyed subordinate to investigate this soldier immediately. Of course, the swordsman takes the instruction without hesitation, and as he places a hand on his chest and bows his head, he assures his master that he will carry out the investigation without delay. After Jaeger leaves, Joseph remains in one spot. He stares at the goblin corpses that have been cut open, thinking about how they were killed. Because in his mind, it doesn't make any sense at all. From the cuts on the goblin corpses that were brought in 1 month ago, he could tell that the swings were crooked and sloppy. Joseph finds it difficult to believe that they were done by the same person, because it shouldn't be possible for anyone to master the path of the sword in only 1 month. A small smile appears on Joseph's face as he wonders whether the boy in question is a true genius of this era. That's when the panels take us back to our hero, finally slicing clean the torso of his enemy. His eyes are ice cold, and it's clear that he has already stepped onto the path of a true swordmaster. Elsewhere in the snowy mountains, we see the mercenaries loading up the many hobgoblin corpses on their wagons. One of them talks about how his side of the place is filled with the trash, and another admits that it's the same on his end. Apparently, the mercenaries thought that there would be treasure somewhere around because of the many hobgoblins that were in the forest. One of the men calls out to Vlad, who's now going by the name Rimmon and also happens to be their captain. The mercenary praises Vlad for his impressive display during his battle with the giant hobgoblin. It's not a surprise, however, because it seems Vlad always does great during their encounters with monsters. The guy keeps showering Vlad with praise, but he doesn't seem to care. In fact, he's a bit irritated by the guy's chattering, so he tells him to stop talking and just focus on loading up his kills. Vlad's latest fan reveals that he already did that and points out that no one would even dare to take his kills for themselves anyway. The man asks Vlad what they're going to do next, explaining that they're almost done with the work on the ground. Feeling excited, he asks Vlad if he would like to do any other work with him. The look on our boy's face shows that he's not interested, but the fan is eager to try his luck. He's about to tell Vlad what a great team they would make by combining his brains and Vlad's swordsmanship, but Vlad bluntly cuts him off, stating that he doesn't believe in working with frauds. Hearing this, the guy is speechless and also offended. After a brief pause, he tells Vlad that he can't keep using the mercenary plaque, and then proceeds to try his luck again. He's about to tell him about a good blacksmith that he knows, but once again, Vlad angrily shuns him. He gets upset and calls the guy by name to show that he isn't messing around. Vlad tells the guy, whose name is Goth, that blabbering can get people killed. He decides at the back of his mind that he would warn him if what he's about to say is just a suggestion. However, if it's some kind of threat, our hero makes up his mind that he'll kill Goth. Seeing how pissed off he is, Goth treads with caution and explains that he was only trying to say that Vlad should be earning a lot more than some petty change, especially when he's so skilled. Since it was just a suggestion, Vlad tells Goth to shut up and keep cleaning, warning him that he will lose his head if he doesn't. The terrified fanboy quickly heeds Vlad's not-so-friendly advice and runs away before he gets decapitated. After Goth leaves, Vlad ponders what he said and decides that he'll have to do something about the stalker soon. The men continue loading up the wagons with the bloody goblin corpses while our hero walks away from there. Vlad starts walking into the woods, and the other mercenaries suspect that he might be going to pray again. For some reason, it appears that our boy always goes to pray in the forest, amazing the men by his consistency. Inside the forest, we see him going on one knee and planting his sword into the ground. The other mercenaries peek at him and talk about how cool he looks in that posture. Some even think that he might actually be a noble. Even if he isn't, they don't believe that someone like him could have been born into the same class as them. In reality, Vlad isn't praying at all. Rather, he's being scolded intensely by the voice in his sword. He berates himself for not being able to cut off the giant hobgoblin with a single strike, and sure enough, the voice calls him a fool. The voice reminds Vlad that the one-hit, one-kill technique lies in the element of surprise. Vlad is too bummed to even try to interpret it, so he just asks the voice what he even means by that. Seeing that he's reluctant to use his brain for it, the voice gives him a very lame explanation like something you'd tell a toddler. Still, Vlad doesn't seem to understand and the voice gets frustrated. The voice reiterates that Vlad is supposed to go wham when the opponent goes whoosh, but still he doesn't understand. And honestly, you can't blame him. As he struggles to interpret what the voice is telling him, the other mercenaries watch him in awe, still thinking that he's prey. The next morning, back at the soldiers' camp, we see them walking around and going about their business after setting up their tents for the night. Soon, it's time for breakfast and Vlad is served a very questionable bowl of soup just like the other mercenaries. The other men dig in immediately, but he is reluctant to eat, afraid that it's not good. He's not even sure that the meat in the soup is actually meat, so he asks the others what kind it is. Goth replies with his mouth full of the food, and simply claims that he doesn't know and doesn't care since it's free. He explains to Vlad that as mercenaries, they have a very hard time finding employers who would provide them with meals for free. One of the other men at the table points out that it's not much of a surprise their bosses could afford it, since they're the Bayazids after all. Another chimes in, commenting that the food is salty, but admits that it's better than having nothing to eat. Despite their attempts to make Vlad more appreciative or even eat the food, he refuses to join them. He just gets up from the table, leaves his food, and tells the other mercenaries to enjoy it since they're okay with it. As Vlad walks out of the place, the other men wonder if he's going to see the priest again. Another thinks that he should even start praying like him too, probably thinking it would make him better with the sword. Unfortunately for him, one of his colleagues dashes his hopes, bluntly telling him that he's never going to be like the praying Rimmon. A while later, Vlad arrives at the priest's tent. The priest, who looks like Albert Einstein in a way, is delighted to see our hero. Vlad greets the dude and addresses him as Father Andreas. He then asks if he had a good night's rest, and the priest assures him that he did, like always. Father Andreas reveals that he heard Vlad was praying last night in the woods, and comments that it must have been very cold out there. It seems everyone thinks Vlad is some kind of devotee. They have no idea that he's taking secret lessons from the voice in his head. It also appears that Vlad is deceiving all of them, including the priest. He's making it look like he's very religious, but in truth, he's only learning the most effective ways to kill with a sword. Vlad tells Father Andreas that he didn't feel cold because he was in the embrace of God, and the old priest laughs in response, claiming that Vlad is more like a priest than he is. Just then, a little priest in training named Jean enters the room and informs Father Andreas that his meal is ready. Father Andreas thanks Jean and asks Vlad to join him for breakfast. He holds the young man's shoulders, making him sit in a chair, and on the table, there's a scrumptious steaming breakfast. Vlad tries to refuse, explaining that he didn't come to eat. But Father Andreas just ignores him and takes his seat. Jean does the same, and when everyone is seated, the priest starts the prayer. Jean closes his eyes like the innocent kid he is, but Vlad has his eyes wide open. Father Andreas sneakily opens one eye to check what he is doing. But when he does, he sees him praying with his eyes closed. Seeing this, he thinks that Vlad is an honest believer who hasn't lost faith even in such a lowly place. Father Andreas believes that he needs to lead the young man, who he knows will always taint his hands with blood during battle. He believes that it's his duty and a fate that God has charged him with. The priest finishes the thought and closes the prayer as well. Then, he says that they can eat, and Vlad thanks him for the prayer. On the table is some rare wheat bread and some soup. Upon seeing this, Vlad is delighted that he can finally eat real food, instead of the strange concoction that the other mercenaries are eating. He is about to take his first bite when Father Andreas interrupts him, asking about his swordsmanship. He claims that he's heard a lot about it, and reveals that Sir Joseph Bayezid might also have heard about it. Father Andreas tells Vlad that Sir Jaeger visited him 2 days ago to ask about the blonde-haired swordsman. Hearing this, our hero gets a bit nervous, so he asks the priest to go on with his story. Andreas smiles sheepishly at Vlad and tells him that after Sir Jaeger came to see him, he recommended him to the main troops, telling him that he looks forward to seeing how Vlad would grow up. Vlad is less than pleased to hear this. In fact, he even seems worried. The innocent priest goes on to tell him about the Bayezid family. He explains that they're a renowned family in the north, and points out that just being able to work for them will put him in a much better environment than the one he's currently in. After the chat with the priest, Vlad becomes very uncomfortable. He goes back into the snowy forest where he allegedly prays, and laments to the voice in his head. He's afraid that he might have drawn too much attention to himself by being so good with the sword. However, the voice tells him that they didn't have a choice, because his kind of swordsmanship can only be learned through real experience. The voice then tells the boy that the real problem started when he got too close to the priest, but our hero just quietly states that he did it because he had to be sure the voice wasn't an evil spirit. The voice already knows what Vlad is implying, and asks him if he's finally gotten his answer now that everything has gone south. Still, Vlad just thinks back to the reason he befriended the priest in the first place. Father Andreas is said to be someone who is reputable, and also possesses great divine power. So much so that he was offered the title of the bishop. He thinks that if someone is spiritually inclined as the priest couldn't sense anything off about him, then he's probably sure that the voice isn't evil. Either way, that's currently not the main concern at hand. Vlad asks if they should run off before Sir Joseph comes looking for him, and the voice suggests that the Bayezid family might turn a blind eye to his false identity since he's a very skilled swordsman. Even if that happens by some miracle, Vlad fears that they will eventually find out he killed a mercenary for stealing. When that happens, he'll be charged with faking his identity and murder at the same time. The voice uses this opportunity to taunt Vlad, telling him that he's pretty evil after all. The boy quickly snaps at the voice talking through the sword, and reminds him that he's also an accomplice to those crimes. Seeing that the odds are against them, the voice suggests that running away would be the better option, pointing out that the excuse of self-defense only works when one has a witness. Hearing this, Vlad agrees that they would both run away at night. He also suggests that they take Goth with them so that they can obtain a fake plaque. The plan sounds very difficult to the voice, and he expresses his concern to Vlad. But just then, the voice senses someone approaching from behind. From the aura the person is giving off, the voice confirms that the person is an advanced knight at the very least. Vlad swiftly turns around, grabs his sword, and goes into battle mode at once. However, when he does, we see that the person is actually Sir Jaeger. The green-eyed knight is surprised that Vlad could sense his presence, and admits that the guy is even better than he anticipated. Our hero maintains a fighting stance, while Jaeger informs him that Sir Joseph would like to see him. Hearing this, Vlad thinks that he should have booked the meeting himself while he had the chance, because now he'll be in big trouble if he doesn't act properly before Sir Joseph. Even though he's very nervous, the boy calmly tells Sir Jaeger that he's honored to be summoned by the young master. Vlad decides to play the poker face, knowing it's an undeniable skill in a card game. Sir Jaeger asks Vlad if he was expecting him, and the young swordsman tells him that he found out from Father Andreas, but admits that he didn't think he would come so soon. Seeing the boy's confidence, Sir Jaeger finds it interesting that such a young kid isn't intimidated by him at all. And then, he asks the boy to follow behind him. When he turns his back, Vlad contemplates making a break for it. but the voice tells him not to try it because a knight of Jaeger's level could kill him before he can even take 3 steps. Vlad accepts his fate when he realizes that he has no choice, so he obediently follows the knight. A while later, they arrive at Sir Joseph's tent, and the young master reveals that he's pleased to finally meet the popular praying Rimmon. Vlad bows his head, stating that it's an honor to meet the second son of the Bayezid family. The young master asks Vlad if there are any inconveniences with his work, and he replies that all the mercenaries are thankful for his consideration. Sir Joseph finally addresses the issue of Vlad's blonde hair and blue eyes, claiming that he used to think he was the son of some fallen noble family. So just to be sure, he asks Vlad if his name is actually Rimmon, and without any doubt, our hero confirms. Just then, Joseph closes the blue book he was reading, and tells Vlad that he should have told him the truth. Suddenly, Sir Jaeger lands a mighty slap on our boy's face, and the young master reveals that he hates liars. The blonde swordsman wipes his cheek as Sir Jaeger stares him down, and in a surprising twist, Sir Joseph reveals that he knows our hero is actually someone named Vlad from the city of Soara. Vlad rubs his chin to reduce the pain from the hard slap, and tries to act unfazed by the fact that the young master knows his true identity. Sir Joseph reveals that from his research, it's been confirmed that Vlad's mother was an unmarried woman. However, they couldn't find out anything about his father. The young master then asks Vlad if he knows who his father is by any chance. Naturally, our hero gets offended and rudely tells Joseph that he's very funny for asking the son of an unmarried woman if he knows who his father is. The next thing we see is Sir Jaeger kicking his leg and sweeping him off the floor. Vlad falls to the floor groaning in pain, and the angry advanced knight tells him not to forget his manners. The boy scowls at Sir Jaeger with anger, but doesn't say anything in response. Sir Joseph suddenly intervenes, saying that there should be no need for violence. He admits that his question was pretty funny, even though it was also insensitive. The young master walks toward Vlad and stands over him. He says that he already knows why Vlad ran away from Soara, and then asks the young swordsman to tell them where he learned to wield a sword. Vlad stays mute and just scowls at Joseph. The young master looks into Vlad's angry blue eyes and claims that they are hiding way too much. Suddenly, Sir Jaeger pulls out his sword and attempts to strike our hero from behind. He quickly senses the imminent danger and bites his lip, before reluctantly revealing that he had a teacher who trained him how to use the sword. Vlad, still on one knee, tells Joseph that the mysterious teacher came to him and then disappeared like lightning. Joseph is surprised to hear this, but Vlad continues to tell him more. He tells Joseph that the teacher didn't disclose his name and only told him about a lone man's ever-winning secret, never to be disclosed to anyone else. Vlad says this while staring intensely at Joseph, and seeing his face, the young master is taken aback because of how unwavering the kid's gaze is. After a brief pause, Joseph just says okay and apologizes to Vlad for the rough treatment. Hearing this, Vlad starts to wonder if his clever lie worked. The young master interrupts his thoughts, explaining that he's currently in a very tight spot. As a result of this, he's decided to make Vlad of Soara an offer and asks the blonde swordsman if he doesn't want to rise to a higher place. He suddenly starts saying things that grab Vlad's attention. From power to freedom, survival, and knighthood, Joseph tells Vlad that he can give him all of these things. Our hero just looks up in awe as the second son of the powerful Bayezid family tells him that he would like to offer his support. The scene shifts, and the next thing we see is 2 men clashing wooden swords. They're sparring with each other, and we quickly realize that it's the advanced knight training Vlad. Meanwhile, the other mercenaries watch in admiration as 2 skilled swordsmen spar. One of them wonders how the young kid is holding his own against the experienced knight, but another just comments that Jaeger is definitely going easy on Vlad. Regardless, they all admit that Vlad is exceptionally skilled and envy him, claiming that he's so lucky since he is already set for a blossoming future. The fight persists, and we find out that Vlad truly doesn't give Sir Jaeger a hard time at all. The knight calls Vlad an arrogant brat for talking to Sir Joseph without respect, when he only has average skills to show for it. And then, Sir Jaeger starts to flex his superiority by holding one hand behind his back and swinging with the other. He effortlessly gives Vlad a very tough time, and tells him that he's an arrogant brat who doesn't know his place. As Vlad struggles to keep up with Sir Jaeger's barrage of attacks, he admits in his mind that the knight is truly on a different level. He's very confused at this point, because if he just dodges Jaeger's attack, the knight simply follows up with another right after. And when that happens, it's too forceful for him to block. Vlad decides that since that's the case, he would need to take a different approach. As such, the next time Jaeger swings at him, he blocks it quickly before slipping his sword underneath Jaeger's own. After setting his sword free, Vlad prepares to unleash a powerful strike, and you can tell he's serious because his eyes start to glow. Jaeger blocks it with his sword, but the spectators start to cheer him on, seeing that he managed to pull off such an impressive skill. The knight taunts Vlad, telling him that he should manage that attempt at least, since it's his best one. However, the exhausted Vlad thinks that he didn't even succeed in his attempt. Instead, he believes that Sir Jaeger just allowed him to land a blow. The knight finally ends the grueling session and tells Vlad that he would have to spar like this twice a day, morning and evening. The boy is horrified to hear this because he knows how difficult it was to survive one session. Vlad is still shaken by what he just heard, but in his dazed state, Sir Jaeger just starts walking away, informing him that it's a wrap for the morning sparring session, telling him not to cool down too much. When Sir Jaeger leaves the scene, Vlad starts to gossip with the voice. He claims that the knight is non-committal and points out how he didn't even give him a single piece of advice. The voice simply chimes in, praising Sir Jaeger's remarkable swordsmanship and reminding Vlad that the knight ruthlessly chopped away all of his superfluous movements. After that, the voice tells Vlad that he can only become better by getting hit every once in a while. Hearing this, Vlad just laments that no one is on his side, no matter where he goes. Back in Joseph's tent, Sir Jaeger arrives to give his report, and the young master asks him what he thinks about Vlad after seeing his skills for himself. The loyal knight admits that they can use Vlad to their advantage, explaining that the young swordsman is at a point where he would even get the attention of the count if he was a noble. Hearing this, Joseph is now sure that his judgments were correct. But even though Vlad is obviously skilled and a valuable asset, Sir Jaeger points out an issue. According to him, the problem with Vlad is that he's arrogant and also doesn't know his place. However, Joseph claims that such traits are to be expected because he grew up in the rough back alleys in the slums. He also points out that etiquette can be taught well if done slowly. With this in mind, Joseph tells Jaeger that he believes he is the right man for the job. Jaeger is speechless upon hearing this, and visibly reluctant to accept the role of teaching Vlad manners. He tells the young master that a disloyal sword cannot be trusted, and Joseph admits that even though Vlad bowed his head the moment he saw him, he still didn't trust him. As such, he would prefer that the allegedly arrogant kid shows his true nature, and have him show what's on the inside instead of pretending. Meanwhile, elsewhere, we see Vlad looking very enraged, claiming that he has something he must do no matter what. Joseph believes that Sir Jaeger taking Vlad under his tutelage is probably for the best, because a relationship where both parties involved want something from each other might just be better. Even though Jaeger isn't fully in support of the plan, he has no choice but to do as his master commands. Joseph feels like Vlad isn't even quite the wolf. He simply believes that the kid is cocky, untrustworthy, and full of himself. He tells Jaeger not to rush anything, because he'll need time to build a huge metaphorical cage for Vlad. He wants the cage to be so big that the wolf in this case, Vlad, would eventually think he's been freed when he's still under their control. Later that evening, some of the mercenaries head out into the cold forests. The men are still finding it difficult to come to terms with the fact that their former captain is now serving under Sir Jaeger. Gold regrets not charming his way to get Jaeger's attention when he had the chance. He thinks that Vlad is very lucky to have found his way out of the expedition team, especially now that the weather has become unbearably cold. His brooding is cut short when the new captain, Sir Roderick, scolds him and orders him to get his acts together so he can do his job well. Gold doesn't like this stuck-up captain at all and thinks that he only just patrolled by so he wouldn't have to check on him for a long while. He decides to get some sleep, but is immediately woken up when he hears Roderick's voice. Gold sees him talking with a woman who claims that she's looking for her kid. Roderick tells the woman that she must be crazy because there are no kids here. However, all of a sudden, he stops talking, and the sudden silence makes Gold get worried. He fearfully goes to check what happened to the captain, but when he gets close, Roderick suddenly starts walking in the opposite direction, which leads out of camp. Gold is horrified when he sees a dirty aura surrounding Roderick's body as he walks deeper into the forest like he's been possessed. The chapter ends here, but I'm left hanging to figure out what happens next. What was that woman's voice from earlier? And what could possibly have possessed Roderick? Also, how is Joseph planning to use our hero in the future? At the start of this episode, we see our hero groaning and complaining while rubbing his shoulder. He feels like the advanced knight should have gone easier on him, but the voice in his head doesn't think so. In fact, it tells him that he's been given a golden opportunity to train with Sir Jaeger. The voice then goes on to remind Vlad that there is a long line of people who would gladly pay to spar with an advanced knight like him, pointing out the value of such an opportunity. Despite the voice's attempt to convince Vlad, the blonde kid still feels like Jaeger just wanted to beat him up. You can't really blame the knight though, because he already thinks that Vlad is a stubborn and arrogant child who doesn't have any respect for his seniors. Our hero makes his point, insisting that Jaeger was only hard on him because he wanted to punish him, but the voice claims that such conditions make the sparring match even better, stating that everyone needs such motivation after all. It makes sense when you think about it, because the motivation to stay alive and not get beaten to death will probably make Vlad fight a lot better. Hearing this, Vlad is speechless for a while, before pointing out that such conditions are pretty upsetting either way. While he's arguing with the voice, someone suddenly whispers from the bushes to get his attention. The boy turns around, and the owner of the voice reveals his location, which happens to be behind a tree. Vlad is quite surprised and confused when he sees that the person is actually Go. He asks the man when he returned, because he doesn't think the rest of the expedition squad is back yet. Before saying anything, Gold looks around suspiciously, almost like he's scanning the area of any unwanted listeners. When he's sure that the coast is clear and no one is watching, he finally reveals that he's planning to run away from the camp at nightfall. As you'd expect, Vlad finds it unbelievable, so he asks him to explain what the heck he's trying to pull. Gold makes things even more mysterious when he suddenly tells Vlad to remember that he's only visiting him out of concern as a friend. He makes a vague statement and then suggests that they meet later and have some fun. Not surprisingly, Vlad gets confused because he's starting to think Gold is just saying nonsense at this point. But the man protests that he isn't and claims that he saw something in the woods with his own eyes. Finally, he tells our hero that the woods they're supposed to explore are cursed. Vlad is alarmed and intrigued upon hearing this, so Gold goes on with his theory. He points out how they've been having a lot of deserters before. However, now, the mercenaries no longer run away because the Bayezid family pays well for their services and also provides them with all the necessities. Vlad agrees with him, but that's when Goth reveals the real shocker. He claims that those so-called deserters weren't actually deserters. Rather, he believes that they are missing people who were taken away by the cursed woods. At this point, Vlad seems like he's become even more worried. The man claims that he saw it with his own eyes. He saw the ghost that took people into the woods. After a brief moment of silence, Vlad suddenly smacks Goth on the head, calling him a rascal for concocting such unrealistic theories. While receiving a good smacking, Goth tries to convince Vlad that he's telling the truth. Of course, our hero doesn't believe him until he reveals that he saw the knight get taken away the previous night. This time, Vlad immediately knows that Goth is talking about Sir Roderick. The man confirms it as well and reveals that while he was returning, he figured out something incredible, which is the fact that all the missing guys had black hair. A while later after that shocking revelation, we see Goth cursing and swearing in regret. He seems like he's terrified of something, and we quickly find out that it's because his little undercover mission has been foiled. Sir Jaeger arrives on his horse with the rest of the mercenaries, while the dumb idiot leads the way. He quietly curses his own goodwill and regrets not running away with his stuff when he had the chance. Now, everyone knows about the curse in the woods, and he's been instructed to lead them to the place. While Goth mumbles like a coward in front, Jaeger notices his weird nature and asks Vlad if he's sure they can trust him. Our hero admits that he doesn't trust the man at all, but he knows for a fact that he's definitely not crazy. Hearing this, the knight just thinks about how young Master Joseph believes that this little mission is an opportunity. Rather than a worthless expedition, discovering a specific trend in the woods might be a lot more beneficial. However, Jaeger admits to himself that their little investigation bothers him. He thinks about how all the missing people had black hair, and as you'd expect, he's pretty uncomfortable going on such a mission when he also has hair of the same color. Just to confirm, he asks our hero if the information about the hair color is correct. Vlad replies to him, saying that 3 knights are positioned at the post in case something happens. Of course, as an advanced knight himself, Jaeger finds it hard to believe in the abilities of others. Because of this, he realizes that despite his worries about having black hair, he has no choice but to stay in the front as the vanguard. Because Sir Roderick is already missing, it's clear that someone more skilled than him needs to step forward. Jaeger is deep in thought regarding this situation when Goth brings him back to reality by revealing that they've already reached the expedition camp. There, Jaeger meets a man named Irun, who introduces himself as Sir Roderick's subordinate. The knight asks him if he's sure that their captain is nowhere to be found, and whether they have checked the entire forest. Irun responds, confirming that they haven't even found a single trace of the man. He claims that even with ex-hunter mercenaries taking the lead, they couldn't find a single footprint to follow. Hearing this, Jaeger realizes that he has no choice but to check out the woods himself. Still mounted on his horse, he orders the mercenaries to search the area in groups of 3 and spread out as far as the eye can see. Of course, the mercenaries all adhere to his instructions and begin the search. Sometime later, we see Goth trying to challenge Vlad, and doubting his character for ratting him out when he came to him in good faith. Enraged, he calls our hero a fraud, who takes advantage of people's good nature. In response, Vlad just tells him to stop talking and focus on the search, while also promising to compensate him later. The two come across Jaeger, who asks them if they found anything, but Vlad claims that they didn't. The knight gets upset and calls them useless country bumpkins, but our boy defends himself, pointing out that he's from the city. Hearing this, Jaeger asks the boy how he found missing people in the back alleys. Vlad tells him that it's always been pretty simple, because all you had to do was grab someone, and beat them up till they tell you where the missing person is. After hearing this fucked up strategy, Jaeger becomes even more certain that Vlad is really useless. That's when he suddenly notices that the sun is setting, which means that nightfall will soon be here. Not knowing what else to do, he wonders if he should return to the camp. Jaeger ponders on it for a moment and suddenly notices the river. He asks Vlad and Goth if the mercenaries searched beyond the river, and Goth claims that he doesn't recall anyone doing so. After all, it wasn't even in the path of the expedition. The advanced knight thinks about how there's no trace in the woods, even though they've searched it twice already. Which means that there's probably no way for them to find Sir Roderick, or the strange woman that Goth mentioned he saw in the woods. With this in mind, he orders the men to gather around to inform them that they'll be crossing the river. Goth obeys the instruction without hesitation and signals the other mercenaries to gather around. Jaeger takes the first step on the ice and confirms that it isn't completely frozen. Vlad points out that it's probably because winter is over. Either way, he feels that it's strong enough for them to get to the other side of the frozen river. Jaeger agrees with him, but suggests that splitting up and crossing separately will be much safer. The other mercenaries meet up with Goth thinking that he found Sir Roderick. However, he explains that it's not the reason he called them. And this is when Jaeger informs them that they'll have to expand the search area by crossing the river. He admits that it's not completely frozen, and decides that they'll divide themselves into 3 groups before crossing it. Once again, all the mercenaries are on board with the plan and express their agreement. Naturally, it doesn't take long for the prepared soldiers before they split up in groups and walk across the frozen river. Along the way, Goth starts to act strange, which our hero doesn't fail to notice. He asks Goth what's the matter, and the man expresses that he's starting to get a bad feeling that something is about to go wrong. Just like before, Vlad downplays his hunch and just accuses him of being afraid. Goth doesn't even deny the fact that he's scared, and simply admits that he's not as great as Vlad and Jaeger, which is the reason why he has to be careful. He points out that someone like him needs to have a good intuition if they want to survive, and right now, that intuition is telling him that shit is about to go south. The man knows that they shouldn't be crossing the river, and after he makes his point, Vlad responds by admitting that even though he doesn't know about intuition, he's certain about something else. The terrified mercenary just stares at him with a confused expression as he waits for Vlad to finish his statement. Our hero finally speaks, and reveals that what he knows for sure is that if Goth runs back now, his death won't be pretty. He bluntly threats to kill the mercenary if he tries to escape, because he's their only clue to find the missing people. Goth is terrified after hearing this, and Vlad just tells him to quit talking about his hunch because crossing the river is his only way of survival. Our hero then gets on the ice and asks Goth to follow him, even though the mercenary hasn't changed his mind, but he now realizes that he has no choice but to cross like everyone else. He takes his first steps and starts shaking, thinking that the ice could break any moment. At this point, Vlad is fed up with the man's cowardly behavior and assures him that even if the ice doesn't break, he'll break it himself and dump him in water if he keeps rambling. In a magnificent display of cowardice, Goth starts crawling on the floor in an attempt to not break it. He claims that he can't cross the river, and a pissed-off Vlad just pulls him by the shirt and asks him to get up because they're the only ones left behind. The moment Vlad tries to pull Goth up, he starts screaming in terror like a maniac. Vlad gets even more upset by his antics, but realizes why he screamed when he looks into the water. You see, the mercenary was horrified to see the corpses. He flips out and screams at the top of his lungs so the others can hear him, as he informs everyone that there are dead bodies in the river. All of a sudden, the dead men beneath the ice appear to be swimming up, and then the ice starts to break. Without understanding what the fuck is going on, all of the mercenaries start to panic. They start running on the ice, hoping they can make it to the banks before it's too late. While the men run to safety, the zombies break through the ice and emerge from the river. Unfortunately for the squad, they don't make it off the ice in time and find themselves surrounded by the dead. The zombies start crawling toward them, and the confused mercs ask Sir Jaeger what they should do. It's at this point that the knight finally realizes that the whole mission was a trap to begin with. After all, it almost as if the zombies were aware of their arrival and laid down an ambush. Unfortunately, they fell right into this trap and found themselves stuck in night and darkness, the territories that were never meant for the living. While Vlad, Jaeger, and the other mercenaries are confronted by the undead army, the scene shifts back to the main camp. There, we see the priest praying to the Lord and thanking him for looking after his people. With the little priest in training by his side, he prays to the Lord to guide them with his light so that they can stay on the righteous path. All of a sudden, the priest stops praying, and the boy kneeling beside him becomes worried. He calls out to the priest, and suddenly, the place starts to shake. The water in a chalice starts to rumble as well until it floats out and starts moving in the air, leaving the priest in a state of bewilderment. The dark water continues to move in the air until an ominous woman appears. She emerges from the dark fog that forms around the camp and starts walking around to look for her child. The fog surrounds this strange woman as she walks around the whole camp. Meanwhile, back on the icy battlefield, we see that a massive fight has blown out between the living and the dead. Unfortunately, the man they came looking for has already been transformed into a zombie and is now mindlessly fighting against his former men. The undead Sir Roderick roars as he tries to hit the cowardly Goth, and rather than running away or standing up to the enemy before him, Goth just screams like a lady, probably thinking it would make some difference. Thankfully, before his former captain can end his life, Vlad arrives just in time to save him by slashing zombie Roderick with his sword. Unfortunately, the moment he does that, the other agitated zombies charge at him with blistering speed. Our hero quickly sees them coming and braces himself for another round. As his eyes begin to glow like a White Walker once again, Vlad strikes a beautiful sword stance to get ready. With mind-boggling speed, he slashes all the zombies in his path. Meanwhile, the coward just screams in fear as the severed body parts of the zombies fly all around him. Not for the first time, Vlad gets irritated by Go's behavior, so he calls him a rascal and instructs him to get up and fight with a spear. Of course, the mercenary insists that he can't do it, he's too terrified to fight the dead. Vlad gets angry at this, because the grown-ass man is now practically a liability on the battlefield. He curses in his mind, but the voice in his head tries to calm him down. It tells him not to get worked up, and advises him to pick a direction before making any attempt to escape. Hearing this, Vlad looks forward and sees 3 zombies coming out of the water with their gaze locked on him. Naturally, that makes it clear that he can't go forward. Now he's starting to wonder if Sir Jaeger is safe either, because the both of them got separated during the ambush. Elsewhere on the ice, we see the senior knight effortlessly slicing up the zombies like he's making an undead salad. Unfortunately, even a great knight like him gets tired at some point, and when he sees a zombie take out one of his men right in front of him, he admits that there's no end to the undead men. At this point, he can't help but thinks that whoever thought of the trap had already planned everything out in advance. Even though he doesn't know who was the mastermind, but he's certain who the intended target is supposed to be. With that in mind, Jaeger's left eye begins to glow with a green color underneath his eye patch. He decides that there's no time to hesitate, and his sword begins to glow as well. It appears that he's using aura, because his eyes and sword are glowing with the same color. The aura surrounds the knight, and by using the power, he's able to take on all the zombies confronting him, annihilating all of them in a single go. In a bright and insanely epic display, Jaeger wipes the floor with the undead. The spectacle is so intriguing that other mercenaries on the ice stop to watch the legend do his thing. They're delighted to see him in action, and are even more motivated to fight after seeing that they have someone like him on their side. In the middle of his intense fight, Jaeger calls out to Vlad, asking him to fulfill his contract. Our hero, who is dealing with another zombie, is alarmed when he hears the knight calling out to him. While fighting off the undead men around him, he yells back to Sir Jaeger, asking the advanced knight what he wants him to do. Surprisingly, the plan turns out to be very simple. He just wants Vlad to defend the right post for as long as he can. He tells him to fulfill his contract as a hired sword and protect young Master Joseph at all costs. Without hesitation, Vlad receives the order and fights the remaining zombies in his path to find his way out of the icy battlefield. As he runs out, he tells the cowardly idiot to come with him, who's already yelling for him to wait. While Vlad leaves the battlefield, we see that Sir Jaeger's left eye is glowing so brightly that it produces a green flame underneath his eye patch. The advanced knight prays to the Lord, hoping for our hero to reach in time to protect the young master. I swear, this guy is the epitome of what a knight should be. He's practically surrounded by the dead who want to end his status as a living being, and yet all he can think about is the safety of the one he serves. The knight then resumes his battle, slashing the undead creatures one after the other. Eventually, he hears a growl behind his back, and even though he's very occupied while dealing with other undead warriors, Jaeger manages to sense the new presence. He quickly turns around to face the threat, and when he does, he sees that it's the zombified version of Sir Roderick. The knight apologizes to his former comrade for being late in his rescue, but Zombie Roderick and the rest of the undead army are already beyond saving as they aim for his life. Meanwhile, back at the main camp, young Master Joseph is sitting in his tent alone, looking pretty bored as usual. Even though he's reading a book, you can tell that he probably wants to be elsewhere. Suddenly, he's interrupted when he hears someone yelling. So, like any normal person, Joseph is alarmed and wonders who made the noise. He then hears the person telling someone or something to get away from him, and that's when it clicks in his head. He realizes that the camp is being invaded. Joseph gets up from his chair and prepares to leave, but then someone enters the room and calls out to him. The young master turns to the person and sees that it's one of his men, Borden. The young master asks Borden what the commotion is all about, but the guy is still trying to catch his breath, so he stutters. It appears that he doesn't even have an explanation, so Joseph gets upset and asks him if he ran into his tent without first finding out what is actually happening. Borden is guilty as charged, but he pretends like that's not the case and claims that he ran into the master's chambers to check if he's safe. He claims that Joseph's safety is of utmost priority, but the young master knows that he's lying. Even if nothing else was going to give it away, the fact that Borden ran into the tent without a sword or weapon proves that he didn't come to protect the young master. Joseph confronts him for not arming himself before coming, and Borden's empty sheath is now on full display, finally making him realize that his sword is missing. If this had been any other regular day, the young master threatens that he would have hanged this imbecile. Hearing this, Borden immediately starts begging for forgiveness, and while that's happening, Father Andreas and some other men enter the tent as well. Joseph asks the priest if he knows what's going on, and before he can even finish his question, Father Andreas tells him that something evil has visited the camp. The priest opens his texts and asks Joseph to come take a look at his Bible written with holy ink. The young master is shocked and confused when he looks at the pages and sees the writings inside trembling like a leaf in a storm. He finds it very concerning, and Father Andreas admits that it's no ordinary object. The uneasy young master asks the priest if there's a way they can stop it, but the father simply replies that he's not an exorcist. Even then, he assures Joseph that he will try to unleash all of his divine powers to ward off the evil. But despite that, he admits that the being they're currently facing is so evil that he might not be of much help. This makes Joseph more nervous, and he starts thinking deeply of a possible solution. Joseph knows that none of the remaining knights can be of much use, but he realizes that they are his last line of defense. As such, he gets up and instructs the knights present to come with him and help him take down the enemy. He takes the lead, and they follow behind him with straight faces, suggesting that they're ready for business. When Joseph comes out of his tent, he's shocked to see the thick fog covering almost everything in sight. Unfortunately, this fog is more ominous than he could ever have imagined. It turns out that the fog not only covers the vision of mercenaries at the camp, it also possesses them and forces them to fight for control over their bodies. The strange woman from earlier is certainly responsible, because the men seem to be possessed by a spirit that calls them her children. Even though they try to fight it, there's not much they can do against the supernatural. While covering his nose to avoid inhaling it, Joseph asks Father Andreas if the fog makes people delirious. The priest doesn't know exactly what it does, but one thing he's sure of is that it's not a natural phenomenon. Unfortunately, it doesn't take too long before this dangerous fog gets to them. Joseph realizes that he's inhaled it and starts to hear the strange spirit call him her child. It soon enters the systems of the priest and the other, and they all experience the same phenomenon. The spirit woman continues searching for her child around the camp, and the moment they see her, they're horrified by her vile appearance. With her long black hair and her creepy white gown, she walks barefoot in the middle of the fog and continues to look around the place. She keeps searching for her child, and when she turns to Joseph, she asks if her child is there. The moment she looks at the young lord, the men around him become terrified at the sight of the apparition's face. Joseph, on the other hand, just stands there speechlessly with his napkin in hand. The witch's black mouth and eyes widen as she screams and yells that she's finally found her child, who appears to be none other than the young master himself. The story has taken an insane turn in the supernatural, and I am a full-blown fan of some horror and action. That of course means that I can hardly wait for the new chapters to come out, so I can sit on my desk and get working on the next episode. And if you guys feel the witch lady stretches out her hands and charges at our hero and the others, while screaming desperately for her boy child. But suddenly, there's a barrier in front of her. We see that Father Andreas is on his knees praying, as a magical shield forms to keep the witch out. But while he's doing that, his horrified little priest in training is screaming and crying the whole time because of how scared he is. The young master just stands within the magic barrier and wonders if in the end, there's no other way for Sir Jaeger to face the possessed lady trying to attack them. The reason he's so worried is that two of his strongest knights, Cade and Maxim, have already been taken out by the witch because they weren't capable enough to defeat her, even with the outstanding blessings of Father Andreas. While he's deep in thought, the witch continues to slam the magical shield, desperately trying to get in, because for some reason, she believes her child is inside. As she pushes her hand through the shield, her fingers begin to burn away, but it doesn't stop her. And upon seeing how relentless she is, Joseph concludes that this whole situation is a spiteful curse that has been aimed at him by some unknown enemy. Meanwhile, Father Andreas continues to hold the shield, but when he sees the little boy, Jean suddenly coughs out blood, and he gets worried and distracted. He looks back at the boy and tries to comfort him, telling him to hang in there and assuring him that the sun shall find its way to him. So, the boy summons all the courage to endure the pain, and he joins the priest in prayers by singing hymns so that they can make the barrier stronger. Despite their brave efforts, the young master can't shake off the feeling that it's only a matter of time before Father Andreas gets exhausted, because he's definitely reached his limits. Even worse, the hymns will soon stop, so it makes him even more concerned and fear for his life. As the supernatural battle of wills goes on, Joseph watches closely and begins to come up with a plan because he feels like the night is too long to wait for the sun to rise. But while he's thinking, he's suddenly drawn back to reality when he sees a familiar figure lunging at the witch from behind. Yep, it's none other than our blonde-haired hero, who's literally flying toward the possessed lady with his glowing blue sword in hand. The witch doesn't sense his presence, so she doesn't turn around to face him. But even at that, Vlad is forced to stop his attack when the voice tells him that the witch is animated by the curse and that a normal sword can't cut through her. As such, our hero stops and hides behind a rock to ask the voice what they should do to defeat her, and the voice asks in return if he can currently use any aura. However, Vlad quickly points out that he can't, so the voice becomes confused. But after a brief pause, it reveals that there's another way to defeat such an enemy, and of course, the blue-eyed kid is curious to find out. That's when the boy suddenly asks Vlad to let him borrow his body for a while. In other words, he's going to possess him and do the job himself. But upon hearing this, our boy becomes concerned and asks if such a thing is even possible. In response, the voice reveals that he's certain he can use auras, but what he doesn't know is if he'll be able to manifest them within the blonde-haired hero's body. And he fears that even if he succeeds at it, he won't be able to move for a while, which is never a good thing in a heated battle against a powerful enemy. The voice honestly tells Vlad that he doesn't recommend such a risky plan, but the young hero knows that if he can't kill the witch, then she'll certainly kill him. And to him, that's enough reason to take some drastic actions. Even though the voice makes it clear to Vlad that the way of the sword is dangerous, he agrees to let him borrow his body. He asks Vlad if he's sure he wants to do it, then the hero reveals that he made a promise to Joseph. And now that he has something he must do, he's vowed to devote himself not with loyalty, but with faith. After hearing him say this, the voice respects his decision, and then the plan is set in motion with Vlad charging at the enemy once more. This time, she senses his presence and turns around to face him, and while our boy is in the air, the voice starts to take over his body. It tells him to close his right eye, and he does, so it doesn't take long before his possession begins. The voice transports Vlad's consciousness to a place he calls the world of voices, and after that happens, our hero's body begins to glow brightly just like his sword, as it becomes filled with aura. Using this power, Vlad suddenly gets close enough to the witch, and with great force, he cuts through her like a piece of bread. Everyone around is shocked to see this, and they all gasp in disbelief. But while they're doing that, Vlad falls to his knees and starts yelling in pain, because the voice is still sending powerful surges of energy into his body. The young master sees this and becomes extremely worried, so he calls out to the hero, hoping to get his attention. But all of a sudden, Vlad's eyes turn white, and he calms down. Even though the blonde-haired kid is no longer screaming in agony, he's certain that what he just saw were traces of aura. And although he doesn't know how he achieved it, he's certain that the young kid must have paid a huge price for it. His thoughts are interrupted when he sees the witch getting back up and starting to call out for her missing child again. Unfortunately, our hero is still weak and unable to move because of the possession. On top of that, the witch is stretching her hand toward him. Determined to save him, Joseph rushes out and tells Father Andreas not to stop the hymns, but they're so shocked at his sudden decision that they try to call him back. The young master quickly gets to Vlad and helps him to get up, while encouraging him to hold on to him. We see our hero groaning in pain, but he manages to move slowly with Joseph before the witch can get to him. Enraged that he got away, she gets back up and grabs a hold of Joseph's leg before he can run away. The young master tries to free himself from her grip, but he finds it extremely difficult, making him think that he's a weakling who's not even capable of getting out of this situation. Just when Joseph feels like it might be over for him, Borden grabs his cloak from behind and pulls him out of the witch's grasp, tossing the young master and our hero to the other side where the priest is. The angry witch yells in rage and despair once this happens, and as Joseph lands on the floor safely, he admits that this is the first time he's glad to have Borden by his side. Of course, the knight is happy to receive validation from his master, so he thanks Joseph. And while the two are exchanging kind words, our favorite blonde-haired swordsman picks up his blade. From the way he's groaning, it's obvious that he's not fully recovered. But that doesn't matter to him, because he suddenly asks Father Andreas to bless his sword, implying that he's ready to go back into the battlefield. Vlad insists that they have to send off the creepy witch, so after a brief pause, the priest agrees with him and decides to do it. Suddenly, he presses his palm against the edge of the blade, allowing it to cut him. And as his blood is smeared all over it, he presents it to our hero, informing him that he's just given him a firm blessing. Immediately, Vlad takes it from the priest, thanking him for his blessing, before walking back into the action. As our boy bravely heads out to face the evil witch and finish her for good, Father Andreas and Jean watch anxiously from behind, praying for him to come out victorious. The injured witch is still lying on the floor and unable to get up, so when Vlad finally gets to her and stands over her with his sword, she begins to beg him, but not exactly for mercy or to spare her life. But rather, she's begging him to find her missing child. Looking at the horrific and nightmarish face of the woman, he sees something unexpected, even though it is only for an instant. Vlad sees a memory of women locked up in a dark prison. While the women were incarcerated, their children were placed outside the cages and laid on the cold floor to die. They beg for their children to be returned to them, but unfortunately, that never happened. Rather, what Vlad sees in the horrifying memories of this woman is that she could do nothing but wail in agony as her child was freezing to death right in front of her eyes. Just like she does now, the woman stretched out her bruised hands from the iron bars, trying to reach her child in vain. At this moment, our hero finally understands the woman's pain and why she's been cursed with the burden of searching for her child for eternity. However, he believes that it's time for her suffering to end, so he takes out his sword and buries it in her head, telling her to rest in peace. As the blood flows down her face, the monstrous demeanor she's had for so long suddenly disappears, and she reverts to her human form. With tears rolling down her face, she looks up at the hero, thinking that perhaps he might be her child all along. While Vlad is busy exercising the curse, the scene shifts to somewhere else, and we see an ominous-looking hooded man sitting in the forest with a strange box between his legs. Judging by the dark aura surrounding the man and the black mysterious fog he's conjuring, it's easy to conclude that this guy is probably responsible for all the paranormal shit that has been going on recently. The evil man continues to control the dark fog, and as he nurtures it to grow bigger, a sick twisted smile appears on his face to confirm that he's definitely a villain. Just when the dark cloud is about to grow as big as he wants, the stuff starts to disappear, and he's instantly alarmed. This villain is shocked at what just happened, because he's probably never had his plans foiled before. But unfortunately for him, today isn't going to be one of his better days. Confused by the fog's disappearance, he concludes that the evil thoughts he's been feeding off from the desperate woman have suddenly stopped. That's right, the moment our hero stabbed the woman in the head and reverted her to her normal self, this weirdo's spell was automatically neutralized. As a result, the sorcerer begins to imagine that someone must have defeated the puppet he's been controlling, and the thought of it bothers him a lot, because he can't even imagine anyone on Earth strong enough to do something like that. However, he suddenly remembers that there's only one knight who knows how to use aura that efficiently. But before he can even say the name, the man responsible appears in front of him, and we find out that it's actually none other than the green-eyed advanced knight, Sir Jaeger. He reveals himself to the evil sorcerer and confirms that his suspicions were correct, because he's finally seen the rat controlling the puppet. As the evil wizard sees Jaeger standing in all his might, with aura covering his entire body, he begins to shiver in fear. The guy looks like he's about to pee his pants, because he knows just how dangerous the man before him is. Jaeger plans to finish off the sorcerer for all the trouble he's caused, and of course, the evil magician also knows that he's done for. However, before we can see the advanced knight unleash the punishment, the scene cuts and we're fast-forwarded to the time where Jaeger is meeting with the young master. When the advanced knight arrives, Joseph asks him if the face he's looking at belongs to the one controlling death from darkness. And that's about the same time we find out that this brooding knight with no chills decapitated the sorcerer, and is now presenting the head to his master. While holding the bloody head by the hair, Sir Jaeger replies, saying that it seems that he's the one. Apart from that discovery, Jaeger also believes that the box that the headless man had is probably the cursed object that the woman from the previous night came looking for. With the head in one hand and the chest box in the other, the knight concludes that the box itself became the woman's missing child's coffin. After receiving the heartbreaking news, the young master instructs Sir Jaeger to hand the box over to Father Andreas so that he can investigate the matter when they return to Varna. Of course, the ever-loyal knight acknowledges the order and assures his master that he'll do it. But before he leaves, Joseph engages him in conversation for a bit. The young master talks about how the expedition, which was supposed to solidify his power, turned out to be a complete failure. And of course, Jaeger agrees with him, admitting that he's also ashamed of the way things turned out. The two men stand on a cliff, and Joseph looks down at the camp below, before stating again that he surely failed. Nevertheless, he decides that they have to return home while treading with light steps. And the moment he says this, Jaeger suddenly asks him if he found the blonde hero useful. Joseph looks at the knight with a side eye for a brief moment, before a knowing grin appears on his face. And then, he reveals that he thinks he might have found the person who would replace him as the sword. The young master begins to recall the magical things he saw the previous night, and begins to say that our blonde-haired hero will grow up to become a swordsman, who shines brighter than anyone. We see a glimpse of the image Joseph has in mind, and let me tell you, it is most certainly glorious. Vlad stands in the middle of blue flames and sparks, as the pure power of aura is manifested in his body. However, that majestic and powerful appearance doesn't really stay for so long. And when it wears off, well, what you'll be left with is a messed up and exhausted blonde kid. The scene shifts, and we see Vlad waking up finally, with his hair looking like a bird's nest where the chicks were fighting, and his pupils looking small like those of someone under the influence. It appears that the shocked look on his face is because he's just been told that he passed out for 3 days, and that he's just waking up. He can't believe it, so he asks the voice in his head to confirm. And of course, the guy up there casually confirms it, advising him to be more careful in the future. As the voice goes on to say he didn't expect the recoil to be so extreme, Vlad just sits in bed like a zombie, still stunned by what he's just been told. Soon enough, he manages to shake off the feeling of shock and admits that it's a relief either way. Because now, he wants to wrap up matters at the camp so that he can return right away with the others. When he says this, the voice informs him that Joseph and the others are actually waiting for him to recover before setting off on their journey back. As our hero uses the sword to anchor himself and sit up, the voice also informs him that the young master seemed to care quite a lot about him. Vlad manages to get on his feet and goes outside. But when he pulls the covers of his tent out of the way, he realizes that there's no one around because the camp is completely deserted. Initially, he's surprised to see this, but then he quickly concludes that it makes sense for them to run away after seeing what went down the previous night. However, our boy realizes that he was too quick to jump to conclusions when he hears the familiar voice of Gove calling to him from behind. Vlad turns around, and the cowardly mercenary starts talking about how worried he was because of the blonde hero. Hearing this, Vlad is unable to hide his joy. He immediately starts teasing Gove for how he wanted to run away before, but ended up being the one who stayed back the longest. Even though most of the mercenaries have fled the Bayezid camp, Gove agreed to stay back with a few others. The reason was simple, and it's the fact that they were promised a raise in their payments until they return. Just then, Ghost starts telling Vlad about his moments of bravery, like how he was the one who brought the blonde hero back to the camp when he couldn't ride his horse, and how he went back into the dangerous forest for the Lord Knight. It turns out that the reason he's saying all of this isn't even to impress Vlad or anything, but it's simply because he wants our hero to put in a good word for him and make him look good in front of the young master later. Of course, Vlad nonchalantly tells the merc that he'll try his best to do so. Suddenly, the mercenary remembers that Sir Jaeger asked him to summon our hero when he woke up. And since Joseph is in the barracks, he urges Vlad to hurry up so he can have enough time to say good things about him. As soon as our boy hears this, he turns around and bids Gove goodbye, but the merc just reminds him again so he doesn't forget. At this point, Vlad is getting pissed off by his behavior, and he starts to wish that God would just make him shut up. Just then, the scene shifts, and we're taken to Joseph's tent where we see him hosting Vlad. While pouring a glass of red wine, he tries to make small talk and ask our hero if he can drink. I don't really know his real age either, but my man assures the young master that he can hold his liquor, pointing out that he used to work in a brothel and a bar. Even though he's had a taste of alcohol, he admits that he's never had fine liquor before. And upon hearing this, Joseph reveals that the bottle in his hand contains a nobleman's drink. Before pouring Vlad a glass, the young master claims that he wants to thank him first, because he knows that the boy could have just run away when things got rough, but instead, he decides to stay and fight till the end. Hearing this, the blonde kid bluntly reminds Joseph that they had a contract after all. But in response, the young master points out that Vlad promised him faith and not his loyalty. As the boy's blue eyes stare at him, he thinks about how the contract was nothing more than mere words at the time. And yet, the kid fulfilled his promise and held up his end of the agreement. Because of this, Joseph decides that Vlad is a talent he can't afford to lose. But then, he suddenly corrects himself and confirms that the kid is more than that, because he's actually a talent he must have on his side. Finally, after thinking about all of this, Joseph pushes a glass of wine to Vlad and tells him that it's time for him to fulfill his own part of the contract. But this time, he's going to reward our hero as per his accomplishments. On this note, the young master formally invites Vlad to join the powerful house of the Bayezid family as a reward. The scene shifts, and we see the beautiful county of Bayezid, called Varna. Joseph and the others have returned, and while they're still settling in, Sir Jaeger informs him that the mercenaries have been dismissed. Hearing this, the young master tells him he's done a good job. He informs his men that the report for the expedition is pending, and as a result, they'll have to stay in Varna for a day or two. Vlad seems to be overwhelmed by the beauty of the place, because he's constantly turning his neck to look around. And when Jaeger notices this, he asks him if it's his first time in the county. In response, the blonde kid just explains to him that it would always be his first time anywhere he goes. After all, he had never before left his miserable slums. This statement earns him the snide and a funny nickname of the country bumpkin, which Jaeger gives him right away. When Joseph hears this, he tells Vlad to take the day off and look around the county, which our hero is very thankful to hear. Before Jaeger leaves with Joseph, he tells Vlad not to get lost in the city and instructs him to be at the city hall by nightfall. Clearly, our boy didn't like Jaeger before, but now, after getting constantly scolded and mocked, he feels like he's starting to really hate the advanced knight. On the contrary, the voice in his head tells him that Jaeger probably likes him as much as Joseph does, but Vlad thinks that any more of the knight's tough love might just get him killed. Our hero shakes off the thought and decides to go get a delicious greasy meal with his fat payment after such a long time. While he's wondering what kind of food they have in Varna, someone tugs on his arm, and he's surprised to see Jean when he turns around. The cute kids gleefully say that the priest would like to see him, if he doesn't already have any major plans for the day. Soon, we see the two standing in front of a massive church, and Vlad admits that even the churches in Soara weren't as big. Jean informs him that even though Sturma is the capital, Varna is the religious center of the kingdom. Jean then asks him to wait inside while he gets the priest, and the moment our boy walks into the church, his jaw drops to the floor at the sight of the magnificently beautiful structures inside the building. At that moment, Vlad realizes that even though he's been going by the name of Praying Rimmon, he hasn't ever said a proper prayer. And as such, he starts to feel guilty, believing that he's somehow committed a sin. Just then, Father Andreas arrives and apologizes for keeping him waiting. But the good-mannered hero tells him it's no problem and thanks him for the invitation. The priest laughs it off and presents him with an ID token, claiming that even though Joseph would have managed fine on his own, tokens from the church are most effective. After all, the Lord's favor spreads across the continent. Vlad is even more surprised when he looks at the token and sees that his guarantor is Father Andreas himself, but the priest brings him out of his daze by giving him the permission to come find him in the church whenever he needs to, because henceforth, he's our hero's guarantor within the city. The blonde kid is speechless upon hearing this, because he never imagined that a back alley kid, who couldn't even have his birth registered, would one day have a sincere guarantor who wrote his name down in this vast world. Overwhelmed by the kind gesture, our hero kneels before the priest to show his gratitude, because from this day forward, he's no longer Vlad from the back alleys, but rather, he's Vlad of Soara. Once again, this manhwa keeps giving you more and more to look forward to. I've been thoroughly immersed in the progress of our hero so far, and I can't wait to see where his journey takes him next. More importantly, I want to know what plans does the young master of the Bayezid family have for our hero. As the story continues, we learn that the country of Bayezid consists of 3 main cities and 12 villages. The first one is Soara, the city near the sea, which is the trade capital of the country. The second is Varnia, the religious capital, and then there's Shatrama, which is the main capital. It also happens to be the place where our hero Vlad is visiting for the first time. As he enters the magnificent city with the young master, he expresses nothing but awe after seeing just the outside of the city. When travelers finally enter the incredible city, the advanced Night Jaeger informs our boy and Go that henceforth, they'll be the guests brought by Sir Joseph. And then he also warns them to be cautious of their actions, because any foolish thing they do will tarnish the image of the young master. Sir Jaeger also tells them to refrain from turning their heads like country bumpkins, and instructs them to just wait patiently while standing still. Vlad, who's been paying attention the whole time, immediately acknowledges the knight's stern warning and advice while the mercenary just mopes around. The knight then informs them that the servants will bring them snacks shortly, and after saying that, he almost makes another statement. But after hesitating for a while, he changes his mind and tells them not to eat the snacks until he returns, because he fears that the 2 uncultured men would devour the food like savages. Of course, the guests aren't totally comfortable with such an arrangement, so Vlad tries to protest, asking if they could at least have a bit to eat. But before he can even finish talking, Sir Jaeger bluntly tells him to shut up, insisting that they don't touch any of the food. After the knight leaves them alone, the 2 guests decide to give themselves a little tour of the castle, so they start moving around and quickly find themselves in the luxurious waiting room filled with gold. The place is so breathtaking that Goth can't believe his eyes at first. The mercenary finds the incredible place to be beyond his imagination, and even admits that Bayezid is totally different compared to the place where he's from. He makes the confession, and our boy, who's equally astounded by the beauty of the place, agrees with him completely. While the 2 gobsmacked guests are still trying to wrap their heads around the sheer elegance of the room, someone interrupts their experience, claiming that he's never seen them around before. Vlad and Goth turn to look at where the voice is coming from, but all they see at first is a shadow standing behind a curtain. The stranger starts walking towards them, revealing that he was just planning to relax in the room for a while before they came in. He finally steps out from behind the curtains, and the moment Vlad sees the face, he somehow recognizes the stranger but can't remember where he's seen him before. The man stands in front of the guests and plainly asks them who they are, but Vlad is so engrossed in trying to figure out where he saw the face that he didn't even hear the question. He soon realizes that the person's aura is completely different, and it's so strong that it's almost as if he can kill a person with his gaze. Truly, this guy's eyes are practically flaming at this point, and when the terrified mercenary sees this, he nervously introduces himself, stuttering in the process before finally explaining that he accompanied Sir Joseph on his conquest. Before he can ramble about matters that concern nobody else, the unidentified noble cuts him off and confirms his name before moving on to ask our boy who he is. So of course, the blonde-haired kid introduces himself as Vlad of Soara. Hearing this, the noble finds the kid a bit interesting, because he's never heard of him before. But in truth, there's something else that intrigues him. As the stranger takes a close look at Vlad's face, he thinks to himself about how impressive the kid is, and notices how his eyes are full of spirit. The most impressive thing he noticed about our boy is the fact that he didn't even flinch when talking to him, which is very strange for him since he has a very scary aura. Overall, he concludes that Joseph has found himself a very useful subordinate. With this in mind, the noble reaches into his pocket and reveals a handful of peanuts to offer to our boy, asking him if he'd like some. Vlad looks at the hand without saying a word at first. After staring at it for a while, he finally reveals that they've been instructed not to eat anything. And upon hearing this, the nobleman is shocked and confused. Seeing his confusion, Vlad gets impatient and blankly explains that they've been told not to eat any food from the place. But while he's saying this, a look of horror appears on Goth's face because he's starting to wonder if Vlad has lost his mind. Dude is shocked to his bones, and quite scared as well because he can't fathom the idea of declining the hospitality of a noble. Meanwhile, the superior nobleman in question just stands there, feeling disappointed and surprised at Vlad's response to his gesture. This little scene ends up confirming that the first thing Vlad of Soara did upon arriving at the Bayezid family estate was to decline the hospitality of Letcher Bayezid, the family's eldest son. Goth literally turns white in embarrassment and fear after our boy's little display, and at the same time, Letcher decides to help himself to the peanuts, admitting that they're tasty. The scene shifts, and the next thing we see is a man writing on a paper, hearing the name Vlad for the first time. It turns out that this man is Joseph's father, who's being informed about the guests that are currently in his home. The focused father doesn't look away from what he's writing, and he then points out how the young master had never brought anyone home aside from Sir Jaeger, who was assigned to him by his mother. Because of this, he suddenly promises to reward Joseph if he succeeds in raising Vlad as a Bayezid family knight. The young master thanks his old man for the offer and bows to him in respect. While he's still in that posture, his father continues talking, and reveals that he's well aware that wielding a blade isn't Joseph's strong suit. But regardless of that, he sternly reminds his son that he's currently inside the Bayezid territory. The young master acknowledges the advice and assures his old man that he won't forget. The father then proceeds to reluctantly ask him about his health, and the son replies that he is fine, earning the pardon to leave the room. As such, he turns around to leave the room and tells his father to take care, but as he walks away, his father watches closely with a very worried look on his face. By the time Joseph is no longer in sight, the man whispers to himself that he better make some tonic for his son. The gray-haired man who's been standing beside him the whole time supports the idea, because he thinks that the young master would be very happy with it. On top of that, he also points out that Madame Oksana would be pleased too, if she finds out that he made the tonic. Hearing this, Joseph's father comments that Joseph's mother, Madame Oksana, is definitely particular when it comes to her son. But after pondering on the thought for a while, he shakes it off and returns his focus to his work. He then asks the old man, named Ragmus, what he thinks about Joseph's report. Ragmus advises the Lord not to take it lightly, claiming that strange phenomena have been occurring frequently. Hearing this, Lord Bayezid gets angry instantly and insists that they have to find the person behind these supernatural occurrences because he feels that the perpetrator has no right to use sorcery in his land. While Joseph's father is fuming with rage, Ragmus reveals that they've been getting reports from Varnia that suggest that there might be a connection between the undead and the curses. All of these clues either point to the perpetrator being an exceptional wizard or that the supernatural phenomena are the results of two wizards working together. The Lord suggests that it could even be the doing of a group or a secret organization, and Ragmus is inclined to entertain that possibility as well. But regardless of all the clues and theories they've come up with, Lord Bayezid states that they don't change anything. The menacing man finally gets up from his chair and coldly vows that the Bayezid family will continue to reign over the land, eliminating all enemies who stand in their way. With a vigorous mind, the furious Lord instructs that the people responsible for the supernatural phenomena be found at once, including those who dare to inflict harm on his son, and then have the guts to cause chaos in his land. Later that night, we see Joseph finally returning to the waiting room with Sir Jaeger. As you can imagine, the starving guests have been waiting for the young master and the knight to return, so when they see the men at last, their moods are instantly lifted. Joseph admits that his little plans took longer than expected, and politely asks the guests if he made them wait for too long. But Goth, who's so excited to see him, quickly tells the young master that they are fine and that it was not a problem at all. When Joseph calls Goth by his name, the mercenary can't contain his joy because he literally can't wait for what the young master has in store for them. Unfortunately, the joy is short-lived when Joseph suddenly tells him that their rewards will be discussed the following day. Goth realizes that his starving and waiting all day was for nothing, but while he's still being consumed by the feeling of disappointment, the young master tells him that a servant will guide him to his room so he can get some rest. Unable to say a single word in response, the man begrudgingly leaves the room and tells the other three men that he's leaving, probably hoping that they would call him back. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen, and the moment he's out of the room, the remaining men decide to have a chat. Joseph initiates this discussion by sitting in his chair and crossing his legs while fixing his gaze on our hero. He recalls how Vlad saved him and pledged to become his sword, urging our guy to remember it as well. Vlad confirms his vow, so Joseph reminds the blonde kid about something that he should do. He concludes that from the way he understands it, Vlad only wishes to fulfill his duties after getting his freedom. The blonde hero confirms this again, so his master once more reminds him that he pledged to become his sword. The noble son reveals that it makes no sense to him how Vlad would pledge to be his sword, and then wish to have his freedom shortly after. At this point, our boy is starting to understand fully what he's gotten into. Joseph sits cross-legged again, and like a mafia boss, he tells Vlad that he wants to make things very clear to him. He promises Vlad to give him an answer to his request, but only after he reveals the true reason why he's asking for freedom. The two young men engage in a brief staring contest, and after a while, Vlad breaks the silence by asking Joseph if he knows a knight called Godwin, who remembers the blue moon. Hearing this, Joseph realizes that Vlad is nothing close to what he thought he was. The young master initially thought that our blonde hero was just a skilled kid, but now he can't believe what he's discovered, because he could never have imagined that the same kid had such an exceptional background. Joseph suddenly reveals that the unknown person who destroyed the rose's smile is Godwin, the Knight of Gadar. Of course, Vlad knows all too well who he's talking about, because he can never forget the figure of that knight. The images of George's separated head flash across our boy's mind, and his pain is resurfaced when he remembers that Godwin was the one who killed his savior and destroyed the world he knew. Despite all the pain this mysterious knight has caused our blonde hero, for some strange reason, he just can't help but admire him. With this thought in mind, Vlad just stands in front of the young master who's still thinking deeply. Eventually, he decides on his answer and tells Vlad that he can't be of help to him, because unfortunately, the people he seeks are way beyond his power, even though he's a son of the Bayezid family. Regardless, our boy is determined to find a solution, so he bluntly reveals that he's aware that Joseph won't be able to help. In fact, he expected something like this to happen, because Joseph is just the Count's son after all. Even though Vlad is disappointed, he gives the young master some credit for at least being honest about his inability to help. In that case, Vlad decides that making some changes to their contract would be in order, but before he can even say this, Joseph reads his mind and suggests it first. He doesn't even give any time for our boy to process anything, and proposes a 7-year contract to keep him in his service. As you can imagine, our boy is horrified to hear this, because that's actually a pretty long time. And before he can start protesting, the young master claims that he's laid down his pride to even make the proposition, making it very clear in case Vlad wasn't aware before. To make matters worse for our blonde hero, the terrifying advanced knight is staring him down like a leopard tracking its prey. After hearing Joseph's offer, our boy thinks about it and admits that even though he isn't sure, it somehow seems like the noble is telling the truth. Still sitting comfy in his chair, the Count's son assures Vlad that he would have a promising future, reminding him that he's his savior. Joseph starts to make the offer a lot more enticing when he explains that for the next 7 years, he would feed, clothe, and even train the blonde kid if he accepts the contract. On top of that, the young master claims that he intends to make the country bumpkin into an outstanding knight, who would never lose to anyone in combat. It was pretty obvious earlier that Vlad didn't like the contract, especially because of the lengthy duration. But the moment he hears the noble say that he would make him a proper knight, his eyes widen with great interest and a sprinkle of disbelief. While our boy is still in a state of shock, Joseph continues to break down the terms of the contract, hoping to entice him even more. He claims that the poor kid from Soara can enjoy all of these benefits, if only he would just remain loyal, and perform only the tasks he's allowed or instructed to handle. Joseph then goes on to state that the issue with Godwin goes without saying, but even though he won't be able to help with that, he reveals that he shall allow him to interfere in any matters that concern his former city. After that, the young master informs Vlad that the girl named Gemina appears to be currently staying in the monastery, and as you'd expect, the kid is shocked to hear that the Count's son knows about his friend. After breaking the news to our hero, Joseph asks him what he hopes to achieve by returning with a sword in his grasp, pointing out that the sword isn't the only sharp thing in the world. This noble soon embarks on what could be called a shocking spree, because at this point, he's just dropping bombshells back to back. Joseph reveals that he too has a weapon of his own as well, and this leaves Vlad dumbfounded once again. So, after placing all his cards on the table, the Count's son finally asks our blonde hero what his answer is. The scene shifts to a while later, and we see Joseph staring at his reflection as he admits that Vlad has an impressive goal. But while he feels his method was okay, Sir Yeager points out that the young master seemed too desperate, and asks him if he really needed to act that way. The loyal knight goes on to state that he can always find a useful kid for his lord, and Joseph replies that he's aware, since talent can be found all over the world. However, the young master reveals that the ability to awaken their talent is a completely different matter, and that's exactly what's keeping him so hooked on our hero. Although he feels that Vlad is the perfect candidate for him, Sir Yeager still tries to change his mind, asking him if he's sure that the blonde kid would simply agree. The young master continues to stare at his reflection for a little while longer, before finally breaking the silence and confirming that he believes Vlad would be perfect for him. The reason for this strong conviction is that Joseph saw it with his own eyes, back when our boy slashed the cursed woman during the expedition. The loyal knight doesn't give up in his attempt to dissuade his master, and then tries another angle by reminding Joseph that Vlad is irrational and rebellious, which would make him difficult to control in the future. Seeing the knight's constant attempts to change his mind, the Count's son decides to flatter him a bit, telling him that training Vlad won't be so hard since there's another advanced knight who's fit for the job. Joseph reminds his loyal subject that 7 years is a significant amount of time, and believes that it should be more than enough to put a leash on Vlad's neck and make him obedient. The nobleman's plan works like a charm, because in the blink of an eye, Jaeger accepts the responsibility of training the heady kid. And even though he's not too excited about it, he assures his master that he'll do his best to make Vlad do their bidding without stress. Hearing this, the young master is pleased, and he motivates the knight even more by suggesting that the more challenging the kid is to manage, the more rewarding the outcome will be. At this point, it's clear that this nobleman is obsessed with our hero, because even after concluding things with Jaeger, he goes back to praising the blonde kid. The man looks at his reflection again, and talks about how he thought Vlad was a useful wolf at first, but now he's also someone who chases after the moon. By the next morning, we see Jaeger taking Vlad to his new room and helping him settle down. The knight admits that it's a bit shabby, but assures the kid that he has the room all to himself. Vlad makes it obvious that he comes from the slums when he exclaims, because he thinks the room looks amazing. To him, this supposedly shabby-looking room is perfect because it doesn't have dirt on the floor, and on top of that, there's even a bed. It's practically a palace in his opinion, and as the knight hears him say all of this, he quickly remembers that the kid is actually from the Alice. He's not used to such behavior because their trainees usually come from affluent backgrounds, which makes them struggle to adapt in the training grounds. With all that has happened in that short while, Jaeger suggests that Vlad won't have any issues settling, unless he decides to cause any trouble. The kid already knows that the knight is referring to the peanut incident with Sir Letcher, so when he starts judging Jaeger with his eyes, the latter shifts the blame back, claiming that he didn't even expect Vlad to obey him since he listened to him before. The little combo is cut short when Jaeger suddenly leaves, but not before telling our boy to meet him at the military exercise hall after he's done eating, because they'll start their sparring sessions together. Just when the knight is about to leave, a lady calls out to him, calling him her loyal knight. For someone who's always brooding and stern, Jaeger gets incredibly flustered just by hearing Lady Oksana's voice. The nervous knight quietly informs Vlad that she's Joseph's mother, and then urges him to pay his respects the way he was taught earlier. Thankfully, our boy doesn't mess it up, since he just imitates the senior knight as he greets the lady. The noblewoman greets them back, and asks if Vlad is the child she's heard about. Jaeger confirms it, claiming that Sir Joseph took him in personally. Hearing this, Lady Oksana looks at our boy intensely with her bright yellow eyes, and it makes him so uncomfortable that he starts blushing for everyone to see. After her little trick works its charm, she thanks him for saving her son, and the flustered kid stutters as he tells her that he was only doing his job. I guess even the heroes can't resist the charm of a MILF. Regardless, she promises to bestow a reward upon him, because he's achieved something much greater than he realizes. With his cheeks still bright red, he bows before her in thanks, before she suddenly rubs his head to compliment the color of his hair and his eyes. Like most mothers, she begins to talk subtly about his appearance, suggesting ways to make him look better, before eventually promising to arrange clothes for him. At this point, our boy is so overwhelmed by her affection and calming aura that he's literally struggling to hide how much blush can show on his face. Thankfully, the motherly woman leaves them at last, telling Jaeger to keep up the good work. After she's gone with her maids, the two guys catch their breath, and the knight asks Vlad why he was so restless. The kid responds that he's never met a noble woman before, and Jaeger comments that he did well for his first time. After all, Lady Oksana has a knack for making people lose their edge. After the little chat, he excused our hero to go and have his meal. The scene then shifts to the dining hall, and there we see a bully spitting into our hero's soup while his minions cheer him on. The troublemaker insults him with the gesture, before proceeding to claim that he mistook Vlad for a trash can because he smells like garbage. Rather than giving them the reaction they want, the blonde kid skillfully scoops out the spit and throws it away before continuing his meal, while thinking about how they're acting up even faster than he expected. The bully and his gang are enraged and confused by his calmness, but while they're pondering on what next to do, our boy remembers Jaeger's warning not to tarnish Joseph's image. So, he tries to think of a way to deal with them, without getting the Count's son involved. The ringleader leaves in a huff and calls our hero a bastard, telling him to get ready for a hazing soon. But before he can exit the area, our boy suddenly asks him what his name is. The bully is shocked to hear this, so Vlad repeats the question. This time, sending chills down the guy's spine with the murderous intent laced all over his face. The troublemaker is instantly terrified, so he stammers a bit as he reveals that his name is Sobanet. Vlad then repeats the name, claiming that he'll remember it, also making it sound as if he had marked him for death. I honestly didn't expect this development, but it looks like our hero has stepped on a path to become a noble. I'm sure he'll get a lot of scorn and resistance on his journey, but I can't wait to see how he proves his worth to the Bayezid family. If you're excited to see more of this story as well, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Sometime later, we see the family head taking a stroll outside with his right-hand man. They get to a point where they see people training below, so the noble suggests that they stay and watch for a bit, to which his trusty assistant completely agrees. Looking down at the training ground, the family man sees something that catches his attention, and it turns out that it's none other than our favorite blonde-haired swordsman. The old noble asks if he's the kid that Joseph brought, recalling that he heard the boy was blonde. He keeps staring at our hero and even admits he's pretty good looking. But he's suddenly interrupted when his assistant calls his attention to something else. It turns out that someone standing on the other far side is watching the training session in secret. However, this peeper isn't just any stranger because they quickly recognize him as the advanced knight, Jaeger. Apparently, he's a bit anxious to see how the blonde swordsman under his care would perform during his first training session. The king totally understands this, but he's also quite eager to see just how skilled this new guy actually is. Soon enough, an intense sparring session begins, and we see our boy clashing wooden swords with the other knight in training. With a cold and emotionless demeanor, he swings his sword over and over at the opponent, forcing him back with each strike and giving him a terribly hard time. His opponent groans as he's forced to defend himself without any breaks, and it makes the spectators wonder how such a young kid can be so fierce in combat. Vlad's bright blue eyes lock in on his target as he unleashes an onslaught of sword strikes which shouldn't even be that easy, seeing that his opponent is much taller than him. Despite how impressive his technique looks, the family head just states that our boy is sloppy, which comes as a surprise to the old man standing beside him, who already feels that he's amazing. He asks the king if he really thinks that, so the latter says that something does shine through. The family head feels that it's praiseworthy, because even though Vlad is clumsy, he's still trying his best to use what he has learned. While he's saying this, we catch a glimpse of his scarred fingers and knuckles, suggesting that they were probably acquired from years of training with the sword. Meanwhile, Vlad continues to dominate his opponent on the training ground, and at the same time, he urges himself to always keep in mind that all swordsmanship starts from his footing. The location of his feet plays a very vital role in sword combat, because it turns out that if he's able to deceive his opponents with his shoulders and his gaze, then he can control the opponent with his movements. Our boy uses all of these skills accurately by first controlling the location of his feet, dropping his shoulders, and tricking the opponent with body movements. At the same time, he keeps his blue gaze locked in on the guy, and our boy uses all of these tricks to lure his opponent in. Sure enough, his plan works, and the guy tries to land a powerful down slash on him, but Vlad skillfully dodges by jumping backward. His black-haired opponent is exhausted and frustrated after missing what looked like the perfect chance. But before he can catch his breath or recover from his mistake, Vlad comes in hard with a power-packed counterattack. The kid lands a devastating hit on the black-haired guy's side, and the force is so much that he screams in agony. You can't blame him though, because that hit looks like it probably damaged some of his internal organs. After literally incapacitating him, Vlad grabs him by the hair and identifies him in one of Sabanin's henchmen. Now, it becomes a lot clearer why our boy was fighting like he had a personal vendetta against him. Vlad drags him by his hair and balls his fist like he's about to punch him into the future. The blonde kid reminds the guy how he enjoyed laughing at him earlier in the cafeteria, and then dares him to try snickering a bit more now. Bro's eyes are glowing with power and rage at this point, and after making his point, he lands a killer punch on the henchman's face. The single blow breaks his nose and leaves blood all over his face. This terrifying sight leaves the other students in a state of shock as they watch on in horror. While the pummeling goes on below, the king's right hand is equally concerned because he doesn't feel that they should just let Vlad beat the shit out of the other guy. However, the family head doesn't seem bothered by this, so he simply tells the old man to let them be, pointing out that to become a knight, such a level of spirit is required. Besides, he says that Sir Yeager seems to be enjoying the beatdown, and his right-hand man agrees when he sees the advanced knight watching with so much concentration. As Vlad continues to reshape his opponent's face with his fist, one of the other students finally has enough of it, so he yells at the new guy to stop hitting him. However, the blonde swordsman just ignores him, which he doesn't take lightly. He starts yelling even more, trying to intimidate him, but Vlad only stops when he's satisfied with the bloody facial reconstruction he's done. With blood stains on his face, he coldly apologizes to the others, admitting that he got too engrossed. But they're instead more concerned about his terrifying gaze, which they don't understand. After beating the other guy into a coma, he turns around and walks away, but before he leaves, he makes sure to taunt Sabanin, asking him to apologize to the henchman on his behalf because he can't get back to his senses when he's too engrossed. Sabanin gets furious and almost curses at him, but before he can do so, Vlad cuts him off. The blonde swordsman suddenly starts walking towards him, saying that he would also like to apologize in advance, telling him that in Sabanin's case, the beating won't just stop where it did today. After staring the troublemaker down, he starts walking away, but before he leaves, he promises to call Sabanin to come spit in his soup again if it turns out to be too bland. Vlad walks away after dropping such a cold line, leaving Sabanin very uncomfortable because he now knows what a crazy bastard the newcomer can be. At this point, he's convinced that Master Joseph brought in a mad dog from the back alleys, but Vlad just smiles back at him like a psychopath, proving his point even further. The scene shifts, and we see a cleaned-up Gove looking sharper than ever while enjoying this meal. At the table, he suddenly asks Vlad if he's really been beating up other vassals, saying that it's a rumor spreading like wildfire among the servants. The swordsman just evades the question by asking Goth about his work as a stable hand, and how difficult it is. The mercenary immediately hops on the topic, saying that he's no ordinary stable hand, because now he works for the great Count Bayezid. Goth is about to start bragging about the experience and all that, but then he suddenly realizes that Vlad managed to distract him from the important discussion at hand. He then reveals that he heard Vlad beat the crap out of guys all over the manor, and reminds the blonde swordsman that it's a crime. Vlad does not seem bothered in the slightest, and he just asks Goth why he's so surprised. The blonde kid reminds Goth that he has always been a criminal, and says that simple assault is going easy on them. Hearing this, Goth is stunned, but he just listens to what he has left to say. Vlad continues to try to justify his actions, claiming that he didn't even hit the guys in an obvious way, and points out that they were the ones who picked a fight with him earlier. Goth still doesn't understand how Vlad can think what he did is okay, but the swordsman argues that it is, saying that now no one talks to him needlessly anymore, which he believes is a good thing. Just then, another student walks in with a tray of food in hand, and introduces himself as Portly Canner. An impatient Vlad turns around, and bluntly asks him what business he has with him. Hearing Vlad's rather unfriendly response, he becomes nervous and starts shaking in fear, so the blonde swordsman tells him to either sit at the table with them, or get lost. The moment Vlad says this, Portly's entire mood brightens up in excitement, because he never imagined that he would get invited to sit beside the blonde swordsman. He quickly joins them at the table, thanking Vlad for inviting him, but the latter just sighs in exhaustion because he actually just wanted the guy to get lost instead. Portly is so excited to sit there that he begins telling the story of how he's been eating alone, in places like the bathroom. As you can imagine, Vlad is grossed out by this, so he reminds the fat kid that he's eating his precious sausage. Portly sees the food, and asks Vlad if it's delicious, before revealing that his father is the one who supplies the manor. The fat boy claims that his Canner family supplies all the meat in the manor, revealing that his family has been in the business of livestock and cattle farming for generations. After telling Vlad all of this, Portly remembers that he saw the hero asking for more sausage earlier, so he offers him some of his own to the new guy. Of course, our boy is suspicious of all of this politeness and kindness, so he snaps at him, asking what he's going on about. Our boy tries to pretend like he's not moved by the mouth-watering offer, but when the scene changes, we see him standing in a heaven of sausages. Turns out that it's Portly's huge stash, which his father sent for him to eat. However, he claims that it's too much for him, so he wants to share. Seeing and hearing all of this, Vlad realizes that all of the vassals in the manor are young masters from great families. The hero actually forgot for a while that these were people he could have never even talked to if he was still in the back alley. With this in mind, he decides that it would be a good idea to build at least one good connection now that he's in such a place. So, out of the blue, he asks Portly if he would like to eat together with them henceforth, and the fat kid gets so excited about it. He accepts the offer, and Vlad confirms that he's okay with the arrangement. The blonde kid then says that all vassals have to get along. And even though it looks like he's befriending Portly for the sake of sausages, we learn that it's not necessarily the case. The scene changes again, and we see the green-eyed advanced knight walking down a big hall. He seems a bit exhausted, probably because serving the young master and literally raising a whole human being is not an easy task for anybody. The stress seems to be piling up for him, and he knows that the only time he'll be able to catch his breath is when his men, Cade and Maxim, recover from their injuries. His trail of thought is interrupted when a big knight with a fat beard approaches him. The guy asks Jaeger where he's off to in such a hurry, and that's when the eye-patched knight turns around to identify him as Sir Gregory. Seeing his fellow knight, he curses at the back of his mind, because he probably didn't want to talk with him. Although he tries to hide his displeasure about the encounter, Sir Gregory spots it in an instant, and laughs about it before accusing him of being too obvious when he's upset. At this point, Jaeger bluntly tells him that he's clearly busy at the moment, and the amused knight just laughs again, telling him that he's not surprised about it. He says that the advanced knight must be indeed very busy since he's the one who handles all of Joseph's duties by himself. Not surprisingly, Jaeger gets tired of the conversation very quickly, so he asks Gregory to cut to the chase, asking if there's something he wants to say. The brown-haired knight keeps smiling like a kid who just received a lollipop, and then reveals that he's come to suggest that a knight like Jaeger should be raising a vassal. Gregory adds that it's not too late for him to do that yet, but the uninterested advanced knight hits back at him, suggesting that he just focuses on raising his own vassal properly. Even though he doesn't really care about anything the jester usually says, he can't help but wonder why he's suddenly talking about vassals out of the blue. The fat knight reveals that his vassal is Portly, and claims that he's already all grown up, but also admits that he needs to lose some weight. Gregory says this, and then bursts into unnecessary laughter once more, so Jaeger reluctantly asks him to explain what exactly he's trying to say. Rather than quickly making his point, he decides to beat about the bush some more, saying that Vlad seemed pretty good to him. He showers praises on the blonde kid, stating that he's manly in character and confident in his spirit. But Jaeger is getting frustrated by the prolonged small talk. Exasperated, he reminds Gregory that he's very busy before asking him once more what exactly his point is. The fat guy just keeps laughing while talking, and then he tells Jaeger that Knight's meddling in Vassal's affairs isn't quite fitting, claiming that it could lead to embarrassment. Regardless, Gregory reveals that Vlad seems to be warming up to Portly lately, but Jaeger doesn't believe this, because he knows that the blonde swordsman doesn't have any friends, and on top of that, he believes that Vlad thinks he's better than everyone else. Despite Jaeger's opinion, Gregory just requests that he tell Vlad to hang out with Portly. The fat knight reveals that the chubby kid is his cousin's nephew, which means that he wouldn't like for him to get beat up in the manor. After making this personal request to Jaeger, he tells him that he's the only one who can influence Vlad's behavior, but the advanced knight doesn't look like he's going to help for free. Jaeger wants to know what he'll be getting in return, so the ever-smiling knight tells him that he can also ask him for a favor in the future. He beats his chest, implying that he would help on his honor as a knight, but that's when Jaeger tells him that Vlad doesn't really listen to him. Hearing this, Gregory exclaims, claiming that such a character is what is going to make our boy go places. Meanwhile, at the Bayezid family stable, we see a brown horse chilling while the stable hand assures Vlad that he's not the problem. Goth explains to his captain that he won't even be able to get on a horse, even though they're all properly trained. He says that the horses don't usually shy away from people, but wonders why they just freak out whenever Vlad approaches them. Goth says that it's a matter separate from skill, and goes on to reveal that even the other stable hands have complained about the issue. Hearing all of this, Vlad curses in frustration, and he feels like this is how it's always been for him. Right from when he was younger, animals always hated him. Cats and dogs would freak out and run away whenever he went near them, and he has a feeling that it's the same problem he's having with the horses. As he thinks deeply about this, he suddenly remembers that he rode Jaeger's horse that day during the expedition. He reminds Goth of the night they fled the undead, but then he admits that he was at the back while Goth did most of the riding. The mercenary quickly informs him that the advanced knight's horse is very expensive, and Vlad is disappointed when he hears this, because he feels like it would sound stupid if he said he could only ride expensive horses. He begins to get frustrated at this point, recalling how Jaeger insisted he learn horse riding at all costs. While the two are brooding over the failure, someone suddenly walks into the room. It turns out to be a maid sent by Lady Oksana who has summoned Vlad. The blonde kid is beyond surprised to hear that she has called for him, and as the scene changes to a very expensive room, we see the green-haired noblewoman talking with our boy. She says that she wouldn't have imagined he grew up in the back alleys because of how he looks now. It turns out that he's wearing a very amazing outfit for a nobleman, and Lady Oksana feels that it suits him very well. The woman tells the clothmaker not to fit it too much since he's 17 years of age and still growing. She then says that Joseph grew a lot as well when he was Vlad's age, and she also promises to get him other clothes when summer comes. After all, clothes fitting of the season are a must for one to maintain physical performance. Vlad's cheeks turn bright red by the time she's done talking, and all he can do in response is to bow his head and thank her genuinely. However, she waves his thanks off and reminds him that she should be the one thanking him because he saved her son's life. The insanely polite lady then apologizes for calling him when he was probably busy training, and then she gives him permission to leave. Hearing this, Vlad thanks her once again and exits the room. Once he's outside, he sighs in relief, feeling that the lady is just difficult to be around for no particular reason. Taking a look at his new outfit, he starts to wonder how much it's worth. It is so comfortable that it doesn't even feel like it belongs to him. But then he looks at his old clothes in his hand and remembers that they weren't even his in the first place. He walks down the hallway and thinks about how he shouldn't get used to this new life. Vlad begins to feel out of place, because even after he tries so hard to get to the Bayezid family, he still feels like he doesn't belong there. The blonde hero even feels like he's gaining weight, and it's like flesh clinging onto his soul. His episode of self-pity is interrupted when he looks out the window and sees something that catches his attention. Vlad is taken aback when he sees Savanen beating one of the other vassals to a pulp. He beats the guy, while calling him a pig and asking him if he forgot what it felt like to get bullied. Savanen seems very furious that the kid started having fun, just because they allowed him to live quietly. It's at this point that we learn that the poor kid on the receiving end of this brutality is Portly. Savanen keeps beating him up, asking him if he likes his new best friend, and as he says this, he just gets even more enraged, claiming that they're a flock of filthy fuckers. Vlad watches on from the high window and concludes that people are truly the same everywhere. He feels that there will always be those having the time of their lives, and those who just can't live in peace. In the end, Vlad feels that they're just rascals who prey on those weaker than them. Feeling very pissed off, he decides that he'll have to wear his old clothes again, at least for just the day. Later that night, he knocks on a door, and when the person inside answers the door, we see that it's Portly. Our boy is speechless when he sees the poor kid's messed up face, and when Portly asks him what he's doing at his door so late at night, He says that he needs something from him. The chubby vassal is surprised and confused when he hears this, but Vlad simply looks inside the room and points at the biggest piece of meat in there, asking Portly to give it to him. The kid is reluctant to let go of this piece because he cherishes the ham too, but Vlad insists. Portly agrees to give it to him, but he feels bad because he thought that they would at least smile while greeting each other. Since that's not the case in their relationship, Portly starts to believe that Vlad just wants to leech off him. Even though it's a harsh and heartbreaking thing to accept, the kid ultimately decides that it's still better than eating alone. Portly brings down the fat piece of ham and offers it to our boy, so Vlad tells him not to think of it as an unfair deal, saying that he is taking a fair price. The injured kid doesn't seem to understand what he's talking about, so Vlad tells him that a knight he knows said something like this once. Our boy goes quiet, and he starts to remember the man who said this to him. He recalls that the knight was a man who only takes the price that is rightfully his. And as he thinks about this, the scene slowly changes from the front of Portly's room to where Vlad is standing menacingly with a wooden sword. He's currently standing in front of the other vassals, who have also armed themselves with their sparring weapons. For some weird reason, they're not even scared at all, and they look so confident, as if they can easily defeat our blonde-haired swordsman. Unfortunately, they're not even nearly as confident as Vlad. With an unfazed look in his eyes, he examines the opposition and confirms that he's going up against 14 of them all by himself. Our boy admits that even the thugs in the back alleys didn't go this far to defeat him, but the moment he says this, the ringleader of his opponents angrily tells him to shut his mouth. Sabanin is so enraged that a vein is bulging out of his forehead when he's talking. He points at the blonde swordsman and challenges him once again, revealing to him that he wants to see how long Vlad can keep up his unwavering spirit. As you'd expect, the fearless hero accepts the challenge without hesitation and gestures for them to come at him and encourages them to do it quickly. In response to Sabanin's threats, he reveals that he quietly came all the way out there just because of him, and so he tells him that he expects the same kind of commitment from him. This only makes the bully so much more furious. He grits his teeth in rage as a very serious scowl stays on his face, and with this kind of anger to fuel him, he shouts for his henchmen to attack Vlad so that they can crush him. Sure enough, they all charge at our boy with their wooden swords, and as they finally come at him, he says to himself that he's glad he changed back to his old clothes, because he's sure that blood is going to splatter tonight. As expected, things are getting heated in our hero's newly elevated life. Although he has the perfect MILF adoring him like his own son, it's not easy to get accepted by the others.